I think it's time for you to move out.
Move? Why?
It's just not working anymore.
I don't understand. I have every intention of living my life here. He's just leaving now.
Good street room.
Yes, everything is ready. Call me back when he's gone.
Mom.
Welcome home, dear. I think we need to talk.
My son disowned me between the main course and dessert. I don't want you in my life anymore, Ethan said across Grant Caldwell's enormous dining table. His billionaire father-in-law sat beside him watching in silence. I stared at the boy I had raised and asked only one question. Are you sure this is what you want? Yes, Ethan said. Madison and the Caldwells are my family now. Something inside me broke, but I refused to let them watch it happen. I picked up my coat and turned toward the door. That was when the butler entered. Mrs. Pierce, there's an estate attorney here asking for you. A moment later, Jonathan Mercer stepped into the room. Grant Caldwell's face went pale. Jonathan looked directly at me. Lauren, I'm here about Samuel's estate and Hawthorne Ridge. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me what you would have done if your own child had said those words to you. If this story speaks to you, please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. 18 months before my son told me I was no longer his family, I still believed success had simply made him busy. That seems almost foolish to me now. But when you love your child, you become very talented at explaining away the things that hurt you. Ethan had not always been ashamed of me. When he was a little boy, he used to wait at the front window for my car every afternoon. I worked as an office manager for a small construction company in Richmond, and no matter how tired I was when I came home, Ethan would race across the living room as if I had been gone for a month instead of 8 hours. Samuel would laugh from the kitchen. Give your mother a chance to put her purse down. Ethan never did. Those memories became painful later because they reminded me that the distance between us had not always existed. Samuel and I were never wealthy. We bought our 3-bedroom house in Richmond when Ethan was 6. The carpet was worn, the kitchen cabinets were outdated, and the backyard fence leaned slightly toward our neighbor's property. But it was ours. Samuel ran a small land surveying business. He was good at what he did, though he never cared about turning it into some enormous company. He would come home with mud on his boots and maps rolled beneath his arm, talking about property lines, easements, old deeds, and county records. I understood perhaps half of it. You spend your days figuring out where everybody's land ends, I once teased him. Samuel smiled. You'd be surprised how much trouble starts when people forget where the line is. For years, I thought he was talking only about property. Samuel and I had one goal that mattered more than anything else: give Ethan choices we had never had. We paid for tutoring when he struggled with algebra. Samuel drove an old Ford truck for 11 years because the money we could have used for another vehicle went toward Ethan's college savings. I worked overtime whenever my company had a major project. When Ethan was accepted into Virginia Tech, Samuel carried the acceptance letter around in his wallet for months. Our son studied business and eventually found his way into real estate development. He was ambitious from the beginning. I admired that about him. He did not want Samuel's small surveying company or my ordinary office job. He wanted large projects, important clients, glass conference rooms, and buildings with his name somewhere on the paperwork. Samuel never resented it. Every generation should want to climb a little higher, he told me. Ethan worked hard. By his mid-30s, he had built a respectable career. Then he met Madison Caldwell. I remember the first time he brought her to my house. She was beautiful, polished, and surprisingly warm. She arrived carrying flowers and insisted on helping me clear the dinner plates. I liked her. More importantly, Ethan loved her. I could see it whenever he looked at her. The Caldwell name meant little to me at first. I knew Caldwell Development Group because anyone who lived in Virginia long enough had seen the name attached to office parks, upscale neighborhoods, shopping developments, and luxury properties. But I did not understand the scale of their wealth until Ethan and Madison became serious. Grant Caldwell was not merely successful, he was a billionaire. His company had projects across several states. Newspapers wrote about his acquisitions. Business magazines photographed him standing in front of architectural models with his arms folded across his chest. Madison had grown up in a world of private schools, vacation homes, charity galas, drivers, household staff, and people who discussed millions of dollars the way Samuel and I discussed replacing a refrigerator. Still, when Ethan told us he planned to marry her, Samuel shook his hand and then hugged him. "Treat her well," he said. "The rest is decoration." Samuel died 3 years after their wedding. A heart attack. Sudden enough that one morning I was complaining because he had left a coffee cup beside the sink, and by that evening I would have given anything to see that cup there again. Ethan was wonderful during those first months. He handled phone calls when I could not. He came by on Sundays. He sat beside me while I sorted through Samuel's clothes. For a while, grief made us closer. Then Grant offered Ethan a position at Caldwell Development Group. I was thrilled. I remember hugging him in my kitchen. "Your father would be so proud." Ethan smiled. "I know, Mom." And I believed that was the beginning of something wonderful for him. In a way it was. His salary increased dramatically. Within a year, he and Madison moved into a beautiful home outside Richmond. He started traveling for projects and attending meetings with people whose names appeared in financial newspapers. His suits changed, his car changed, even the way he carried himself changed. At first I thought it was confidence. The first moment that truly bothered me happened at a Caldwell Foundation dinner. Ethan had invited me because Madison was receiving recognition for a fundraising campaign. I bought a new navy dress for the occasion. When Ethan picked me up, he looked at me for several seconds. "You're wearing that." I looked down. "What's wrong with it? Nothing." His tone said otherwise. Then he sighed. "It's just a formal event, Mom." "It is formal. I know. Forget it." He kissed my cheek, but I spent the entire drive wondering what he had seen when he looked at me. At dinner, I found myself seated beside the wife of one of Grant's executives. She was friendly and asked where Ethan had grown up. I told her about our old neighborhood. I mentioned how Ethan used to mow lawns during the summer and how Samuel made him save half of everything he earned. The woman laughed. "That explains why he's so disciplined." I smiled. Across the table, Ethan did not. Later near the coat room, he pulled me aside. "Mom, you don't have to tell everyone those stories." "What stories about me mowing lawns? About the old house? All of that?" I stared at him. "Why not? Because it makes it sound like we struggled. We didn't struggle. That's not the point." I waited for him to explain what the point was. He never did. A few weeks later, Madison invited me to brunch. Before I left home, Ethan called. "Mom, maybe wear the cream jacket Madison gave you for Christmas." I laughed. "Since when are you my stylist? I'm serious." "So am I." There was silence. Then he said, "Sometimes you don't realize how things come across." That sentence stayed with me. How things come across. Not who I was, not whether I was kind, not whether I treated people with respect, how I came across. I began noticing other things. If I said your father used to at a Caldwell gathering, Ethan would quickly redirect the conversation. If someone asked what Samuel had done for a living, Ethan sometimes answered before I could. "He worked in land services." Land services. Samuel would have laughed at that. He had been a surveyor. He was proud of it. One Sunday, Ethan came over for coffee. We were sitting at the same kitchen table where he had done his homework as a child when he looked around the room. "You ever think about remodeling?" I smiled. "Why is the kitchen offending you?" "I'm serious. These cabinets are 30 years old. They still hold dishes." He rubbed his forehead. "You could at least update things." "For whom?" "For yourself." "I like my house." He looked as though he wanted to say something else. Instead, he took a drink of coffee. Then his eyes settled on a photograph on the wall. It showed Samuel and Ethan standing beside Samuel's old Ford truck. Ethan was 17, wearing a faded t-shirt and holding a fishing pole. That picture is still up. Why wouldn't it be no reason? But there was a reason. I could feel it. That afternoon, after Ethan left, I stood in front of the photograph for a long time. Samuel looked exhausted in it. He had probably worked all week before taking Ethan fishing that Saturday. But he was smiling. So was our son. Neither of them looked embarrassed. The real change became impossible to ignore at Madison's birthday dinner. Grant had reserved a private room at an expensive restaurant in Richmond. There were perhaps 20 people there, most connected to Caldwell development in some way. Someone asked Ethan where he had learned his work ethic. Before Ethan could answer, I smiled and said, "His father." Ethan stiffened. I continued without thinking. Samuel used to take him along on surveying jobs sometimes. Ethan hated waking up early, but his father told him nobody ever learned the value of land by looking at it from an office. Grant Caldwell was seated 3 chairs away. Until that moment he had barely been listening. Then he looked directly at me. Not casually. Carefully. Ethan noticed. His expression changed immediately. He interrupted me. "That was a long time ago, Mom." The conversation moved on. But on the drive home, Ethan was unusually quiet. Finally I asked, "Did I embarrass you again?" He gripped the steering wheel. "I wish you wouldn't bring Dad's work into every conversation." I mentioned him once. "You don't understand these people. These people, you know what I mean." "No, Ethan. I don't." He exhaled sharply. "I'm building something here." "So was your father." "That's not what I meant." I turned toward the window. Richmond passed outside in streaks of streetlights and storefronts. For the first time I understood that Ethan was not merely trying to become successful. He was trying to become someone who had always been successful. Someone who had never lived in a modest house. Someone whose father had never come home with mud on his boots. Someone whose mother did not shop carefully, save coupons, or wear the same good navy dress more than once. And to become that person, he needed people around him to forget where he came from, including me. I told myself it was insecurity. I told myself Grant's world intimidated him. I told myself Ethan would eventually become comfortable enough with his success to stop treating his past like something that needed to be hidden. I wanted to believe ambition had temporarily confused him. What I did not yet understand was that Ethan's embarrassment was only the surface. Something else had begun happening inside Caldwell Development. Something involving Samuel. Something involving land. And before long, my son would stop asking me to change my clothes or keep quiet about his childhood. He would begin asking questions about his father's old papers. Questions that at first seemed completely harmless. The first time Grant Caldwell heard my husband's full name, he stopped smiling. It happened 3 months after Madison's birthday dinner at the annual Caldwell Foundation benefit in downtown Richmond. By then I had become accustomed to feeling slightly misplaced at Caldwell events. That evening, the ballroom looked as though someone had designed it specifically to remind ordinary people how much money could change a room. Tall arrangements of white flowers stood on every table. Crystal glasses caught the light from enormous chandeliers. Men in tailored tuxedos spoke quietly about developments, acquisitions, and investments, while women in elegant gowns greeted one another as if they had all known each other for decades. I had bought another dress. Not because Ethan had asked me to, because I had learned. That realization bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror before leaving home and wondered whether the woman looking back at me appeared expensive enough not to embarrass her son. Then I became angry with myself. Samuel would have hated that question. So I put on the dress, added the pearl earrings he had given me for our 30th anniversary, and went. Madison greeted me warmly. "You look beautiful, Lauren." "Thank you, sweetheart." She kissed my cheek. Ethan appeared a few seconds later. His eyes moved over my clothes. I noticed. He noticed that I noticed. "You look nice, Mom." Apparently I passed inspection. His expression tightened. "Please don't start." I wasn't starting anything. Madison looked between us but said nothing. I decided not to ruin her evening. The foundation was raising money for affordable housing programs, which struck me as somewhat ironic considering Caldwell Development was famous for luxury properties. Still, I reminded myself that good work was good work regardless of who funded it. I found my assigned table and spent most of dinner speaking with a retired pediatrician and his wife. For nearly 2 hours, nothing unusual happened. Then Grant Caldwell sat beside me. It was temporary. Someone had called away the man who had been sitting there, and Grant took the empty chair while waiting for the next part of the program. Lauren. Grant. We had met enough times by then to use first names, although I never felt I actually knew him. Grant had a way of making eye contact that felt less like conversation and more like evaluation. He asked whether I was enjoying the evening. Very much. And retirement. I'm still getting used to having nowhere I'm required to be at 8 in the morning. He smiled politely. You worked in construction, didn't you? For a construction company. Office manager. For how long? Almost 27 years. That's impressive. It paid the bills. And your husband? Something about the question surprised me. Perhaps because Grant had never asked about Samuel before. He was a land surveyor. Grant lifted his glass. Commercial, a little. Mostly private property boundary work subdivision surveys. Whatever kept the business going. His own firm, yes. What was the name? I almost laughed. It wasn't exactly a corporate empire. Pierce Land Surveying. Grant's hand stopped, only for a second. But I saw it. What was your husband's name, Samuel? Grant turned fully toward me. Samuel Pierce, yes. His expression became unreadable. Samuel Pierce from Hanover County. Now it was my turn to stop. Yes. Grant leaned back slightly. I waited for recognition to turn into a story. Instead he said, small world. You knew of him. How Virginia real estate is smaller than people imagine. That was not an answer. I smiled. Samuel used to say the same thing about land records. Grant's eyes remained on mine. What else did Samuel say about land? The question was so strange that I laughed softly, more than I ever wanted to hear. Grant did not laugh. Before I could ask anything else, one of his executives approached. Grant, they need you backstage. Grant stood immediately. Of course. Then he looked down at me. It was good talking with you, Lauren. You too. He walked away. I watched him cross the ballroom. There was nothing dramatic about the moment. No accusation. No revelation. But after 39 years of marriage, I had learned something from Samuel. People who work around property become very good at hiding interest. They ask casual questions when they are anything but casual. And Grant Caldwell had not asked about Samuel casually. I looked across the room for Ethan. He was already watching me. Our eyes met. He looked away first. That unsettled me even more. Later, while people gathered near the ballroom doors, Ethan appeared beside me. You ready? I thought Madison wanted us to stay for the auction. She's staying. I'll take you home. I can get a car. I said I'll take you. His tone reminded me of the teenager he had once been whenever he wanted to discuss something without admitting it. We collected our coats and walked outside. The moment we were inside his car, I asked, "What was that about? What, Grant?" Ethan started the engine. What about him? He knew your father. I'm sure they crossed paths. That isn't what Grant said. Ethan pulled away from the curb. What did he say that he knew of him? Then there you go. I turned toward my son. Ethan. Why are you acting nervous? I'm not nervous. You're gripping that steering wheel like it owes you money. He loosened his hands. For several blocks, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan said, Mom, you really don't need to talk about Dad's old business around Grant. There it was again. Not the clothes this time, not the house. Samuel. Why? Because it's irrelevant. To what? To anything happening now? He asked me. You could have kept it general. I stared at Ethan. Why would I need to? He sighed. Because Dad operated on a completely different level. The words struck harder than he intended. Or perhaps exactly as hard. A different level. You know what I mean? No. Explain it. Grant deals with major developments, hundreds of millions of dollars. Dad did boundary surveys and residential work. And nothing. You sound embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed. Then why do you keep asking me to hide him? That finally made Ethan look at me. I'm not asking you to hide Dad. You changed land surveyor to land services. You don't want me talking about his old truck. You don't want me mentioning that you went to work with him. Now Grant hears his name, and suddenly you're telling me not to discuss his business. You're connecting things that aren't connected. Am I? Ethan looked back at the road. For a moment I saw something in his face that was not embarrassment. Concern. Has anyone from Caldwell Development contacted you? He asked. The question came from nowhere. No. About Dad, no. About any old property. I stared at him. What old property? Ethan immediately shook his head. Forget it. No. You asked. I was just making conversation. That wasn't conversation. He became quiet again. We were approaching my neighborhood. I thought about Grant's expression. Then Ethan's questions. Did your father ever work for Grant? Ethan asked. I don't think so. Did he ever mention him? Not that I remember. Any Caldwell projects? I said I don't remember. Ethan nodded. Then far too casually he asked, what happened to Dad's old business records? That question stayed in the air between us. What records? Surveys, deeds, client files, whatever he kept. Some were transferred when the business closed. Some are probably still boxed up. Where I felt something cold settle in my stomach. At home. All of them I don't know. Ethan nodded slowly. Okay. Why no reason? You keep saying that. He pulled into my driveway. The porch light illuminated the front of the house where Ethan had grown up. For a moment neither of us moved. Then I asked him something I had never expected to ask my own child. Is there something you're not telling me? He turned toward me. No. I searched his face. I knew that face. I had watched it change from infancy to childhood, adolescence to adulthood. I had known when he lied about breaking a neighbor's window at 11. I had known when he pretended not to care about being rejected by a girl at 16. I had known when he called from college claiming he was fine, even though homesickness was hiding beneath every word. Mothers do not always know everything, but we learn the geography of our children's faces, and Ethan was hiding something. I opened the car door. Good night, Mom. I looked back. He hesitated, then said, just, if anybody calls about Dad's old work, talk to me first. Why? So I can help. With what understanding it? I almost laughed. Your father explained land records to me for 39 years. I survived. That's not what I meant. I know. I closed the door. Ethan waited until I was inside before driving away. I stood behind the curtain and watched his taillights disappear. Then I went upstairs. Samuel's belongings were mostly stored in the guest bedroom closet. I had not opened several of the boxes since the year he died. For months after losing him, even touching his handwriting felt like reopening a wound. That night, however, curiosity overcame grief. I carried one box to the bed. Inside were old tax documents, business cards, surveying notebooks, receipts, photographs, and folded maps. The smell of paper and dust brought Samuel back so vividly that I had to sit down. I picked up one of his notebooks. His handwriting filled the pages. Measurements, parcel numbers, names, small sketches of boundaries and roads. I understood almost none of it. Then an envelope slipped from between two folders. There was nothing extraordinary about it. No warning. No secret message. Just Samuel's handwriting across the front. Property records, personal. I opened it. Inside were several old documents. Most meant nothing to me. Then I saw a place name written across the top of a survey map. Hawthorne Ridge. I stared at it. The name felt familiar, although I could not immediately remember why. 31 acres. Albemarle County. Samuel Pierce. I ran my fingers across my husband's signature. Then I remembered something. Years earlier, Samuel and I had been sitting at this very house after dinner. He had been sorting paperwork at the kitchen table. I had asked why he kept documents for property we never visited. He smiled and said, "Not every piece of land matters because of what sits on it." At the time I had rolled my eyes. "Samuel, that sounds like one of your surveyor riddles." He laughed. Maybe it had been. Maybe it had not. I looked again at the map. There was a narrow strip extending from the main parcel toward a roadway. I had no idea what it meant. But suddenly I remembered Grant asking about Samuel. I remembered Ethan asking where his father's records were. And I remembered the nervousness in my son's voice when he asked whether anyone from Caldwell Development had contacted me. I placed the documents back inside the envelope, but I did not return them to the box. I carried them downstairs and put them in the locked drawer of Samuel's old desk. For the first time since his death, I wondered whether my husband had left behind something I did not understand. I would not have to wonder for long, because within weeks, Ethan would begin asking me about Hawthorne Ridge himself. And when he did, he would know far more about my husband's forgotten property than I did. 3 weeks after the Caldwell Foundation benefit, Ethan started visiting me again. At first, I was relieved. That is difficult to admit now, because I should have been suspicious sooner. But when your child has been drifting away from you, even a small movement back can feel like hope. He came on a Sunday morning carrying coffee in a paper bag from the bakery I liked. "Peace offering," he said when I opened the door. "For what?" "For being difficult lately." I stepped aside. "At least you know." He laughed. For a few minutes, he sounded like my old Ethan. We sat at the kitchen table eating blueberry muffins and talking about ordinary things. Madison was planning a trip to Charleston with friends. Ethan complained about a contractor who kept missing deadlines. I told him my neighbor had finally cut down the maple tree that dropped leaves into both our yards. It felt wonderfully normal. Then Ethan glanced toward the hallway. "Have you gone through any more of Dad's stuff?" There it was. I put down my coffee. "Some." "Anything interesting?" "Depends on what you consider interesting. Your father kept receipts from 20 years ago." Ethan smiled. "That sounds like Dad." I watched him carefully. "You were asking about his records the other night." "Just curious." "About what?" He leaned back. "Old properties, surveys, that kind of thing." "Why, Mom, I work in development. Old property records are literally part of my business." That sounded reasonable. Maybe that was why I wanted to believe him. I did not mention the envelope in Samuel's desk. Instead, I asked, "Is there something specific you're looking for?" Ethan hesitated. Hawthorne Ridge sound familiar. The name hit me differently when it came from his mouth. I kept my expression neutral. "A little. Dad ever talk about it, maybe." "What did he say? I don't remember." That was not entirely true. I remembered Samuel telling me that not every piece of land mattered because of what sat on it. But I wanted to know what Ethan knew before I told him what I knew. He picked a piece from his muffin. "I think Dad owns something out there." "You think some old county records came up during a title review for Caldwell Development?" He looked at me. "Possibly. Possibly it's complicated." I folded my hands. "Then simplify it." He laughed, but there was tension behind it. "There's nothing dramatic happening. We're reviewing parcels around a potential project area. Dad's name appeared in some historical records. My husband has been dead for years. Property records don't disappear when people die." I thought about the envelope upstairs. "What exactly do you need?" "Nothing right now." He took another sip of coffee. Then, as though the question had just occurred to him, he asked, "Do you know who has the deed? Number Dad's lawyer, maybe?" "I don't know." "Was there a trust?" "I don't know that either." "Did you ever sign anything after Dad died?" I stared at him. "Ethan, what you've asked me 4 questions in 30 seconds about something you said was just curiosity." He looked irritated. "I'm trying to understand the ownership history." "Why?" "Because if Dad still had an interest in that property when he died, you might have inherited something. Then why wouldn't you just say that?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That bothered me more than any answer would have. Finally, he said, "I didn't want you getting worried about paperwork before I knew whether it mattered." "Does it matter?" "Probably not." "Probably." That word followed me after he left. Before walking out the door, Ethan turned back. "If you find anything labeled Hawthorne Ridge, can you call me why? So I can take a look." I thought it probably didn't matter. He gave me a strained smile. "Exactly. I can save you the trouble." After he drove away, I went upstairs and opened Samuel's desk. The envelope was exactly where I had left it. I spread the papers across the bed. There was the survey map, 31 acres, several parcel references, a narrow strip of land extending toward a road, and documents filled with language I did not understand. Easement, access, right-of-way, beneficial interest. Some pages were copies, others appeared original. One document referenced something called the Pierce Family Trust. I sat very still. Ethan had asked whether there was a trust. How had he known to ask? I spent the next hour trying to understand the papers. Samuel had always handled these things. Not because he controlled our finances. We made household decisions together. I knew our bank accounts, insurance policies, retirement savings, mortgage history. But land was Samuel's world. He could look at a legal description and visualize a property in his head. To me, it was numbers and directions. That evening, I called Ethan. He answered immediately. "Hey, Mom, you mentioned a trust this morning." Silence. "Yes." "Why?" "Because Dad could have put property into one." "Did he?" "I don't know." "Then why did you ask?" Another pause. "I told you. We found some records." "What records, Mom?" "I can't discuss internal Caldwell files. You can ask me about my dead husband's documents, but you can't tell me why." "That's not fair." "No, Ethan. It's exactly fair." His voice softened. "I'm trying to help you. I haven't asked for help." "Fine." He sounded frustrated now. "Just don't sign anything if somebody contacts you." That sentence froze me. Who would contact me? I don't know. Then why are you warning me? I'm being careful. So am I. I ended the call. For several days nothing happened. Then Ethan visited again. This time there were no muffins. He arrived after work still wearing a charcoal suit and carrying his laptop bag. "I only have 20 minutes, then you better talk quickly." He smiled faintly. "Still mad?" "I'm not mad. I'm confused." He followed me into the living room. "Did you find anything? You didn't come to ask how I'm doing?" "Of course I did. You asked about paperwork before you sat down." He sighed. "Mom." I waited. Finally, he sat across from me. "Caldwell Development is evaluating some land near Charlottesville. Hawthorne Ridge." "Yes. And your father's name is involved." "Technically." I disliked that word immediately. What does technically mean? It means some older ownership records include Dad. Does he own the land or not? That's what we're trying to determine. We, our legal team. Why? Because title needs to be clear before development moves forward. There it was. Development, not curiosity, not helping his mother understand an inheritance. Business. What does Caldwell want with Hawthorne Ridge? It's part of a larger area. What larger area? I can't discuss that yet. I looked at my son for a long moment. Then neither can I. His jaw tightened. Meaning. I'm not showing you Samuel's papers until somebody tells me what this is really about. You found papers. The speed of the question told me everything. I did not answer. Ethan leaned forward. "What did you find?" "You just told me you can't discuss your company's information. That's different. How? Because these documents could affect you. They belong to me. They might belong to the estate, which still makes them none of Caldwell Development's business unless my attorney says otherwise." Ethan stared at me. I had rarely spoken to him that way. Maybe he was beginning to realize I was not as easily managed as he had assumed. "Do you even know who Dad's attorney was?" he asked. "No." "Exactly. What is that supposed to mean?" "It means you could make a mistake because you don't understand what you're looking at." The words stung. Not because they were entirely false. I did not understand the documents. But Samuel had never treated my lack of technical knowledge as stupidity. "I'm 68, Ethan. Not 6. I didn't say you were. You didn't have to." He stood. "I'm trying to protect you." From what he said, nothing. From Grant, his eyes changed. That was enough. "Mom, don't make this into something it isn't." "Then tell me what it is." "I can't." "Then we're done talking about it." He picked up his laptop bag. At the door he turned. "If you find a deed, don't lose it. I don't lose important documents. And don't sign anything." I almost laughed. "You keep saying that, because it matters." After he left, I locked the door and stood in the hallway, angry enough to shake. Then something came back to me. Not a document, a memory. Samuel had been sick for several weeks before his death, though none of us knew how little time he had left. One evening, I found him sitting at the kitchen table sorting files. There had been a yellow folder beside him. I remembered the words Hawthorne Ridge written across the tab. "What's that?" I had asked. "Old business." "Then why are you bringing it home?" Samuel had looked at me strangely. I had forgotten that look until now. He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. "Lauren, if anybody ever comes asking about Hawthorne Ridge, don't let them rush you." I had laughed. Who is coming to ask me about land? Probably nobody. Then why are you telling me? Because I'd rather tell you something you never need than leave you needing something I never told you. That was Samuel. Always preparing for storms that had not arrived. I remembered rolling my eyes. Then he had become serious. Promise me something. What, never sign anything concerning Hawthorne Ridge without your own lawyer. My own lawyer, not Ethan, not someone from a development company. My own lawyer. I sat down at the kitchen table where that conversation had happened years earlier. For the first time, Samuel's warning no longer sounded like a husband being overly cautious. It sounded like preparation. The next morning I returned to the box of records. I found the yellow folder. Inside were additional surveys correspondence and a business card. The card was old enough that the edges had yellowed. Jonathan Mercer, Estate Planning and Property Law. On the back in Samuel's handwriting were 6 words: if needed, Lauren can trust him. I read the sentence 3 times. Then my phone rang. Ethan. I let it ring. For the first time in my life, I understood that protecting my relationship with my son might require me to stop automatically trusting him. I placed Jonathan Mercer's card beside the Hawthorne Ridge documents. I still did not know what Samuel had protected. I did not know what Grant Caldwell wanted. And I did not know how deeply Ethan had already become involved. But I knew one thing. The next person I spoke to about Hawthorne Ridge would not be my son. I did not call Jonathan Mercer the next morning. Looking back, I wish I had. But grief has strange habits. Samuel had been gone for years, yet calling the lawyer whose card he had personally marked felt like admitting my husband had been preparing for a problem I had never known existed. So I put the card in my purse and waited. For exactly 9 days. On the 10th morning, I discovered Hawthorne Ridge without looking for it. I was sitting at my kitchen table with coffee and the Richmond Times-Dispatch open on my tablet when a business article caught my attention. Caldwell Development announces major Charlottesville project. Normally, I would have scrolled past it. But Ethan's photograph appeared beneath the headline. He was standing beside Grant Caldwell and several other executives in front of a large architectural rendering. I enlarged the article. Caldwell Development Group had announced plans for a luxury mixed-use community outside Charlottesville. The proposed development would include upscale residences, retail space, restaurants, walking trails, office buildings, and a private recreational complex. The projected investment was enormous, hundreds of millions of dollars. Grant described it as one of the company's most ambitious projects in Virginia. Ethan was quoted too. He called the development a transformational opportunity for the region. I should have felt proud. Instead, my eyes moved to the map beneath the article. The project covered a broad area of land divided into several parcels. Most were shaded. One was not. A narrow, irregular section sat between 2 larger areas. The label beside it made my coffee cup stop halfway to my mouth. Hawthorne Ridge. I enlarged the map until the words blurred. Then I went upstairs. Samuel's yellow folder was still locked in his desk. I brought it downstairs and spread the survey beside the article. The shapes were not identical because Samuel's map was older and more detailed, but the roads lined up, the creek lined up, and that narrow strip extending from the 31-acre parcel seemed to reach toward the same highway shown near Caldwell's proposed development. My heart began pounding. I read the article again. There was no mention of Samuel. No mention of the Pierce family trust. No mention that at least part of the land appeared to be outside Caldwell's control. Yet Ethan had known enough to ask about the deed, the trust, whether I had signed anything after Samuel died. I picked up my phone. My first instinct was to call him. Then I remembered Samuel's warning. Never sign anything concerning Hawthorne Ridge without your own lawyer. So I did something different. I searched county property records online. It took me nearly an hour to navigate the system. Eventually, I found references to Samuel Pierce's old parcel numbers and documents I did not fully understand. But one thing became clear. Samuel's connection to Hawthorne Ridge had not simply disappeared when he died. Something remained. I closed the laptop. That afternoon, Ethan called. "Hey, Mom, you busy tonight? Why can I stop by?" I almost smiled at the predictability. "What time? 6 fine." He arrived at 6:10 carrying a slim leather folder. No coffee, no muffins. He kissed my cheek and walked directly into the kitchen. How are you? Fine. Good. He placed the folder on the table. What's that? Just some paperwork. I looked at him. You seem to bring a lot of paperwork lately. He ignored the comment. Remember when we talked about Dad's old property, Hawthorne Ridge? Yes. He opened the folder. Inside were several neatly printed documents with colored tabs indicating where signatures were required. My stomach tightened. What is this? Basically a title cleanup. Basically, there are some old interests connected to Dad's records. Caldwell's legal team is trying to clear everything before the next phase. Of the Charlottesville project, Ethan looked surprised. You saw the announcement? I read newspapers. Right. He slid the papers toward me. This isn't a sale or anything dramatic. It just clarifies some old title issues. I did not touch them. What am I signing away? You're not signing away anything meaningful. That wasn't my question. He leaned back. Mom, this is exactly why I wanted to handle it for you. The language makes things sound more complicated than they are. Then explain it. It releases any residual claims associated with certain parcels and access rights. Access rights. I remembered seeing that phrase in Samuel's papers. What access rights? Old easements mostly. Mostly. Ethan sighed. Can we not do this? Do what? Turn routine paperwork into a courtroom drama. I stared at my son. You brought legal documents into my kitchen and asked me to sign them. I didn't ask you yet. You put tabs beside the signature lines. He looked down at the papers. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked, why does Caldwell Development need my signature? It's precautionary. Then why does it matter whether I sign? Because unresolved title issues can delay projects, so it does matter. Ethan rubbed his forehead. Technically. There was that word again. I pulled the documents closer but did not sign. At the top of one page was Caldwell Development Group. Another referenced Hawthorne Ridge. Another included language about access, right-of-way, future claims, successors, beneficiaries, and trusts. My hands went cold. Did Grant send you here? No. Did Caldwell's legal department? Mom, who prepared these? Our attorneys. Then Caldwell sent them. It's my project too. That answer told me more than he intended. Your project? I'm part of the development team. How big a part? He hesitated. This project matters for my future at the company. I sat back. Finally, something honest. How much? What? How much does it matter? A lot. And you need my signature. We need clean title. That sounds like yes. Ethan's frustration returned. Why are you making this personal? I almost laughed. You came into my house asking your mother to sign documents involving property her dead husband owned, and you're asking why I'm making it personal. That's not fair. Neither is calling something meaningless while admitting your career depends on it. His jaw tightened. I never said my career depends on your signature. Then leave the documents and let my attorney review them. That stopped him. What attorney? My attorney. You have an attorney? I can get one. Mom, you don't need to spend thousands of dollars on this. Then Caldwell can wait. There's nothing to review. Wonderful. My lawyer should finish quickly. Ethan pushed back from the table. This is ridiculous. I looked at him. There was something almost frightening about how quickly his expression had changed. Not frightening because I thought he would hurt me, because I saw desperation. What, aren't you telling me? Nothing. Then why are you angry? I'm not angry. You are. I'm frustrated because you don't understand what you're looking at. Then help me understand. I have been trying. No, you've been trying to make me stop asking. He stood and walked toward the kitchen window. Outside, the backyard looked exactly as it had for years. Samuel's old wooden shed, the garden bed I no longer maintained properly, the fence he had repaired twice. Ethan stared outside for several seconds. Then he said quietly, "This project could change everything for me." I did not answer. Grant is watching how I handle it. There it was, not completely, but enough. And handling me is part of the project. He turned around. That's not what I meant. It's what you said. Mom, please. The word almost broke me. Not because he sounded loving, because he sounded like a man negotiating. I looked down at the papers. What happens if I don't sign? His face hardened again. It creates unnecessary complications. For whom? For everyone. Especially you. Yes. At least that answer was honest. I closed the folder. I'm not signing tonight. Why? Because your father told me never to sign anything involving Hawthorne Ridge without my own lawyer. The color seemed to drain from Ethan's face. For 1 second he looked genuinely stunned. Dad said that, yes. When years ago. What exactly did he tell you? That is between your father and me. Mom, if Dad told you something about this property, I need to know. No. You want to know? He stepped closer. This could affect the entire project. Then Hawthorne Ridge isn't meaningless. Silence. That was the moment the truth finally settled between us. He had been caught inside his own contradiction. I pushed the folder back across the table. Take these. You're making a mistake. Maybe. Grant won't understand why you're refusing something this simple. Grant Caldwell doesn't need to understand my decisions. You don't know how this business works. No. But I know how pressure works. He picked up the folder. At the doorway, he stopped. Please don't contact anyone about this until I talk to you. I almost asked why. Then I realized I was tired of questions he would not answer. Good night, Ethan. He left. I watched through the window as he sat in his car for several minutes before driving away. The next morning, I returned to the article. This time, I searched Caldwell Development's website for the project. I found a more detailed rendering: roads, entrances, commercial areas, residential sections, and one proposed access route leading toward the state highway. I compared it with Samuel's old survey. The narrow strip on Samuel's map appeared to sit exactly where Caldwell wanted that access. I was not a surveyor. I could have been wrong. But I suddenly understood Samuel's old sentence. Not every piece of land matters because of what sits on it. Maybe Hawthorne Ridge did not matter because of 31 acres. Maybe it mattered because of where those acres were, or what they controlled. I picked up Jonathan Mercer's business card. This time I was ready to call. Before I could dial, my phone rang. Ethan again. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a message appeared. Mom, Grant is willing to make you an offer for whatever interest Dad left behind. It's generous. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I read it twice, then a third time. 9 days earlier, Ethan had claimed he did not even know whether Samuel's interest mattered. Now a billionaire was willing to pay me for it. I placed my phone on the table. Then I dialed the number on Jonathan Mercer's card. A receptionist answered. Mercer and Hale, good morning. My name is Lauren Pierce. There was a brief pause as she typed. My husband was Samuel Pierce. Another pause. Then her voice changed. Yes, Mrs. Pierce. That surprised me. I found Mr. Mercer's card among my husband's papers. I understand. I'd like to make an appointment regarding a property called Hawthorne Ridge. This time the silence lasted longer. Then she said something that made me sit straighter. Mr. Mercer has been expecting that call. Mr. Mercer has been expecting that call. Those words stayed with me long after I hung up. I had not spoken to Jonathan Mercer in my life. As far as I knew, I had never even met him. Yet somehow Samuel had left my name with a lawyer who had been waiting years for me to ask about Hawthorne Ridge. My appointment was scheduled for the following Thursday. I told no one, especially Ethan. But Ethan did not give me much time to think. 2 days later, he appeared at my front door just after 7 in the evening. This time, he carried no leather folder. He had only his phone and an expression I recognized immediately. He wanted something. Can I come in? I stepped aside. He walked into the living room but did not sit. You didn't return my call. I saw your message, and in what Grant's willing to make an offer. I know. You wrote that. Ethan exhaled. Can we please not do this? Do what make every conversation difficult. I looked at him. I remember when conversations between us weren't difficult. His expression softened for a second. Then the business-like look returned. Grant authorized me to bring you a preliminary number. I folded my arms. How much? 240,000. I said nothing. Ethan mistook my silence for surprise. That's a very good offer, Mom. For 31 acres. His eyes narrowed. So you found the deed. I found records. What records? That's not the question. It matters. To you, to everyone involved. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. Ethan followed. You have to understand, he said, the land by itself isn't particularly valuable. Then why does Grant want it? Because it simplifies the project. How assembly, title continuity, planning. Those sounded like words selected specifically to avoid explaining anything. I turned toward him. Does Caldwell need Hawthorne Ridge? Need is a strong word. Does Caldwell want it? Obviously. For $240,000. Yes. Why? He rubbed his jaw. Because having everything consolidated is easier. What about the access rights? His eyes shifted. There it was. I had touched the right nerve. What access rights? He asked. The ones in the documents you wanted me to sign. Those are old technical interests. Then they have no value. I didn't say that. How much are they worth? There isn't a simple answer. Try. Mom. I'm not a land appraiser. No, you're a real estate developer. That doesn't mean I can assign a number to every easement in Virginia. I took a drink of water, then I'll hire someone who can. Ethan's face changed. Why would you do that? The question was so revealing that I almost felt sorry for him. Because someone is offering to buy something I own. You don't even know whether you own it. Then I'll hire someone to determine that too. You're going to waste money on attorneys and appraisers for property that has been sitting unused for years. If it's so worthless, Grant can build around it. Ethan looked away. That was the first time I knew with certainty that he could not. Not easily, anyway. I set the glass down. Does Grant know you're here? Yes. Did he tell you to offer me $240,000? He approved it. And what happens to you if I accept? His eyes returned to mine. Nothing. Ethan. Nothing directly. Indirectly, he became irritated. Why does everything have to be a conspiracy? Because you keep answering simple questions with complicated answers. He pulled out a kitchen chair and sat. For a moment he looked exhausted rather than angry. This project is important. I know. It could be one of the largest projects I've ever worked on. I know that too. Grant has been giving me more responsibility. I waited. If I prove I can handle this phase, there could be opportunities. What kind? Leadership. A promotion potentially. There it was. The real price tag, not $240,000. Ethan's future inside Caldwell Development. I sat across from him. Did Grant tell you your promotion depends on getting my signature? No. Did he imply it? Ethan looked down. Business doesn't work that way. That means yes. No, it doesn't. Then look me in the eye and tell me Hawthorne Ridge has nothing to do with your advancement. He looked at me, but he did not say it. My heart hurt more than I expected. I remembered the boy who once brought me a handmade Mother's Day card with crooked letters that said, I was the best mom in Virginia. Now he was sitting at my kitchen table negotiating against me for his billionaire father-in-law. Do you know what your father would think about this? I asked. His jaw tightened. Please don't. Don't use Dad against me. I'm not using him against you. Yes, you are. I'm asking whether you ever wondered why he told me not to sign anything involving this land. That could have meant anything. Did Grant ever tell you he knew your father? Ethan hesitated. Not really. Not really. He mentioned they had crossed paths. When a while ago. Before or after Caldwell started working on this project, I don't remember. I did not believe him. Did Samuel ever refuse to sell something to Grant? Ethan's expression changed again. That told me I was getting closer. I don't know. You've never heard anything about that? No. The answer came too quickly. I leaned back. Then there's nothing else to discuss tonight. Mom, I'm not accepting $240,000. You haven't even thought about it. I've thought about it enough. That money could make your retirement much easier. My retirement is fine. You could renovate the house. I like my house. You could travel. I can travel now. You could move somewhere nicer. I stared at him. Nicer for whom? He closed his eyes briefly. That's not what I meant. It keeps happening, Ethan. You say things you don't mean, and somehow they always sound exactly like what you mean. He stood. You're being stubborn, and you're being disrespectful. I'm trying to give you nearly $250,000 for land you didn't even remember you had. You're not giving me anything. That stopped him. Grant Caldwell is trying to buy something from me. Those are very different things. His face hardened. You don't understand the position you're putting me in. There it was again. Me. Not the property. Not Samuel. Not whether the offer was fair. His position. I'm not putting you anywhere. Yes, you are. No, Grant put you there when he sent you to negotiate with your mother. He didn't send me. You said he approved the offer. That doesn't mean enough. My voice was quiet, but Ethan stopped. I spent most of my adult life making things easier for you, I said. Your father did too. We were happy to do it because you were our child. But I will not sign away something Samuel specifically told me to protect just because saying no makes your job uncomfortable. You're risking millions in project delays over something you don't understand. The words came out before he could stop them. Silence filled the kitchen. I looked at him. Millions. His face went still. You just told me the property wasn't particularly valuable. I meant the project overall. No. You said my refusal could risk millions in delays. I was speaking generally. Ethan. He picked up his phone. This is pointless. No. I think this is the first useful conversation we've had. He started toward the door. Then he turned. If you refuse this because of some sentimental attachment to Dad, Grant isn't going to keep increasing the offer forever. I never asked him to. You're making a mistake. Then it will be mine. He stared at me. For a second, anger took over his face completely. You're willing to damage my future for land you haven't visited in years. My throat tightened. Is that really what you think I'm doing? What else am I supposed to think that your mother deserves to know the truth before she signs something? I've told you the truth. No, Ethan. You've told me whatever you thought would get my signature. He left without saying goodbye. The front door closed harder than necessary. I stood alone in the kitchen. I wanted to cry. Instead, I sat at the table and looked at the empty chair across from me. That was where Ethan had done his homework, where Samuel had taught him to calculate percentages, where we had celebrated birthdays with grocery store cakes when money was tight. And now my son had looked at me as if I were an obstacle between him and the life he believed he deserved. My phone rang. For one irrational second, I hoped it was Ethan calling to apologize. It was an unfamiliar Richmond number. Hello, Mrs. Pierce. Yes, this is Jonathan Mercer. I straightened. I thought our appointment was Thursday. It is. I wanted to speak with you personally beforehand. His voice was calm, measured. Your receptionist said you were expecting my call. I was. Why? A pause. Because Samuel asked me to. Hearing my husband's name nearly broke the composure I had held all evening. When several years before his death, I closed my eyes. What did he tell you? That if anyone connected to Caldwell Development ever approached you about Hawthorne Ridge, I was to make sure you understood exactly what you owned before you signed anything. My fingers tightened around the phone. Mr. Mercer, they already approached me. I suspected they might. They offered me $240,000. Jonathan was silent. Not for 2 seconds. For almost 10. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Lauren, do not sign anything. I haven't. Good. Is the land worth more? Yes. How much more? That requires professional valuation, and the acreage is only part of the issue. What is the other part? Another pause. Access. I looked toward Samuel's old desk in the next room. The corridor. You found the records? Yes. Then Samuel prepared you better than I realized. I don't understand them. You don't need to tonight. Why does Caldwell want the corridor? Jonathan spoke carefully. Because Hawthorne Ridge sits in a position that gives your family control over something far more important than 31 acres. My heart began beating faster. What the most practical connection between a major portion of Caldwell's proposed development and the state highway? I said nothing. Suddenly, the narrow strip on Samuel's survey made sense. The access route on Caldwell's rendering. Ethan's questions. Grant's interest. the $240,000 offer. Jonathan continued. Without properly negotiated access rights, Caldwell may face significant problems with planning, zoning, traffic approvals, and financing. How significant? Potentially very significant. I thought about Ethan's accidental admission. Millions in project delays. Then Jonathan said the words that finally changed the way I saw everything. And Lauren, there's something else you need to know before Thursday. What Grant Caldwell has tried to acquire those rights before. I stopped breathing for a moment. When years ago, from Samuel, yes. What happened? Jonathan's answer was simple. Your husband refused to sell. I barely slept after Jonathan told me Samuel had once refused to sell Hawthorne Ridge to Grant Caldwell. Every time I closed my eyes, another memory surfaced. Samuel sitting at our kitchen table with maps spread around him. Samuel locking certain files in his desk. Samuel telling me never to sign anything concerning Hawthorne Ridge without my own lawyer. For years I had treated those moments as pieces of a life I did not completely understand. Now they seemed connected. Thursday morning I arrived at Jonathan Mercer's office 20 minutes early. His firm occupied the third floor of an older brick building near downtown Richmond. Nothing about it looked flashy. There was no marble lobby or enormous company logo. That reassured me. The receptionist recognized my name immediately. Mr. Mercer is ready for you, Mrs. Pierce. Jonathan came out himself. He was tall, silver-haired, and probably in his early 60s. He wore a dark suit and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who did not need to advertise how much he knew. Lauren. He extended his hand. Jonathan. For a second I simply looked at him. You knew my husband. I did. How well? A faint smile appeared. Well enough to know he would be irritated with me if I let you sign something you didn't understand. That sounded so much like Samuel that I almost laughed. Instead, my eyes filled. Jonathan noticed but did not make me uncomfortable by mentioning it. He opened his office door. Come in. A large folder was already waiting on the conference table. Pierce Family Trust. Seeing our family name printed across legal documents made everything suddenly real. Jonathan sat across from me. Before we discuss Caldwell, I want to explain what Samuel actually owned. I'd appreciate that. He opened the folder. Hawthorne Ridge consists of approximately 31 acres in Albemarle County. That part I know. The acreage itself has value. But Samuel's interest was more complicated than ordinary ownership. Jonathan removed an old survey. I recognized Samuel's handwriting immediately. He pointed to the narrow strip I had noticed. This is the important piece. The corridor. Yes. What exactly is it? Decades ago, several parcels in that area were configured differently. Samuel understood that future development would eventually require reliable access toward the state highway. How? He was a surveyor. Jonathan smiled. Good surveyors don't only see where property lines are. They see what those lines might mean 20 years later. That sounded like my husband, Jonathan continued. Samuel gradually acquired interests associated with Hawthorne Ridge and secured control over this access corridor. Why? At first because he believed the land was undervalued. Later because development pressure increased. He showed me another document. This corridor affects the most practical route between a large portion of the surrounding property and the highway network Caldwell intends to use. So Caldwell can't build without it. I wouldn't put it that simply. They may have alternatives. Expensive alternatives. Potentially extremely expensive. That distinction mattered. Jonathan explained that Caldwell could attempt redesigned access, pursue other agreements, modify planning applications, or negotiate with additional property owners. But all those options involve time, and in real estate development time could become money very quickly. How much money? I asked. Millions depending on delays, redesign requirements, financing commitments, and approvals. Ethan's words came back to me. You're risking millions in project delays. He had known. Maybe not everything, but enough. Jonathan turned another page. Now we need to discuss the trust. I looked at the heading. Pierce Family Trust. I didn't even know Samuel created one. You knew about your primary estate plan. This was structured separately because Samuel wanted certain restrictions around Hawthorne Ridge. Restrictions on me, protections for you. I frowned. Jonathan folded his hands. When Samuel became concerned about his health, he worried that if something happened to him, someone might approach you immediately while you were grieving. My throat tightened. He thought that far ahead. Samuel thought about everything involving land that far ahead. I smiled through the ache. That sounds like him. He placed the property interests into the trust. You are the primary beneficiary, meaning the economic benefit ultimately belongs to you, subject to the trust provisions. Does Ethan own any part? No. The answer came immediately. I looked at him. None, not through this trust. Something inside me relaxed. Not because I wanted to exclude my son, because Ethan had behaved as though he had some right to direct my decision. He did not. Jonathan continued. Samuel included a management period designed to prevent rushed transfers. Certain powers remained with the trustee under specific conditions. Who is the trustee? Our firm has served in that capacity according to Samuel's instructions, so I couldn't have sold it immediately after he died, not without going through the structure Samuel established. Why didn't anyone explain this to me? Then, we provided estate notices and documents, but Samuel specifically instructed us not to burden you with unnecessary detail unless a transaction became relevant. I shook my head. That sounds infuriatingly like him too. Jonathan smiled. He was protective, sometimes too protective. Yes. For a moment, grief sat between us without becoming unbearable. Then I asked the question that had been waiting since our phone call. What happened between Samuel and Grant Caldwell? Jonathan leaned back. It began years ago before Caldwell Development had assembled most of the surrounding property. How many years? Roughly 15. Samuel had still been working full-time then. Grant approached him personally, initially through representatives. Jonathan removed a copy of a letter. Caldwell wanted an option to acquire the corridor along with Samuel's interest in Hawthorne Ridge. I scanned the page. The numbers meant little without context. Was the offer bad? Samuel thought so. Because it was too low, partly. What was the other part? Jonathan was silent for a moment. Samuel believed Caldwell's broader acquisition strategy would place pressure on several smaller landowners nearby. What kind of pressure? Nothing necessarily illegal. But large developers have leverage ordinary property owners don't. Timing, lawyers, options, infrastructure plans, the ability to wait. I thought about Grant, the calm voice, the expensive suit, the assumption that other people eventually understood what was good for them. Samuel objected strongly. That sounds like him. Jonathan nodded. He believed if Caldwell controlled the corridor too early, surrounding owners would lose bargaining power, so he refused. Yes. Did Grant increase the offer several times, and Samuel kept refusing? Yes. I could almost see my husband doing it. Not dramatically. Samuel was not dramatic. He would have sat across from Grant Caldwell in his worn work boots, listened to every number, folded the proposal, and said no. What did Grant do? Eventually he moved on. Apparently not. No. Jonathan turned to another document. Caldwell Development continued acquiring land in the broader area through different entities over the years. And now they're ready to build. Exactly. I looked down at the survey. So Samuel knew this day might come. He believed it might. Why didn't he tell me? Jonathan took a breath. I asked him that. That surprised me. What did he say? Jonathan looked directly at me. He said you had spent your entire marriage worrying about bills. Ethan, your jobs, the mortgage, retirement, and everyone else. He didn't want you spending 20 years worrying about a piece of land that might never matter. Tears reached my eyes before I could stop them. I looked away. Samuel had always done that. Carried worry quietly. Sometimes I had resented him for it. Now I would have given anything to argue with him about it one more time. Jonathan gave me a moment. Then I asked, did he leave instructions about what I should do? No. That surprised me more than anything else. No, he deliberately refused to. Why? Because he wanted the choice to be yours. I looked down at Samuel's signature. Not Ethan's, not Grant's. Mine. What if I want to sell? You can negotiate. What if I don't? You are not required to. What if Caldwell offers enough money to change my life? Then you decide whether the money matters more than keeping the property. And if I want conditions, you negotiate conditions. It sounded almost too simple. For weeks, Ethan had made me feel as though I were standing in the path of something too large and sophisticated for me to understand. Jonathan was telling me the opposite. I did not have to understand Grant Caldwell's world. I only had to understand what belonged to me. There's another issue, Jonathan said. I looked up. Of course there is. His expression became serious. About 2 months ago, someone contacted our office asking questions about whether the Pierce Family Trust remained active, who they represented themselves as conducting title due diligence. For Caldwell, they did not initially say, but the contact information traced back to a law firm that regularly represents Caldwell Development. My stomach tightened. So Grant knew about the trust. At minimum, his legal team knew enough to ask. And Ethan, I can't tell you what Ethan knows. I thought about my son asking whether Samuel had created a trust. He had known that word before I did. Could Caldwell access the trust documents? Some property records are public. The trust itself is not simply open for inspection. That may be why they were asking, trying to determine whether I could sign everything away, possibly. I thought about the papers Ethan had brought into my kitchen. Signature tabs already attached. Routine title cleanup. My sadness hardened into something else. Not revenge. Clarity. Jonathan was $240,000 a fair offer. He did not hesitate. I would not advise you to accept any offer until independent valuation is completed. That wasn't my question. A small smile appeared. You really were married to Samuel. 39 years. Jonathan nodded. Then I'll answer the way he would have wanted. He closed the folder. No, Lauren. Based on what I currently know, I would not consider $240,000 remotely sufficient to compensate you for the strategic importance of the rights involved. I sat back. For the first time, I allowed myself to understand what Ethan had actually done. He had not simply asked his mother for a favor. He had brought me documents designed to surrender rights he knew mattered to his employer. And he had done it without telling me their real value. I looked at Jonathan. What happens now? Now we verify everything. We order an independent appraisal. We examine Caldwell's proposed access plan. And you sign nothing until you understand every consequence. I nodded. Then Jonathan reached into the folder and removed a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front. Lauren. Samuel's handwriting. My breath caught. What is that? Something your husband left with me. When before he died. I reached for it. Jonathan kept his hand on the envelope for one additional second. He asked me to give this to you only if Hawthorne Ridge ever became the subject of a serious acquisition attempt. I stared at my name. What's inside? I don't know. Samuel sealed it himself. My fingers trembled as I took the envelope. For the first time since walking into Jonathan's office, I was afraid to learn more. Because Hawthorne Ridge was no longer just forgotten land. It was something Samuel had deliberately protected. Something Grant Caldwell had wanted for 15 years. Something my own son had tried to persuade me to surrender for a fraction of its strategic value. And whatever Samuel had written inside that envelope might finally explain why. I did not open Samuel's letter in Jonathan Mercer's office. I tried. My thumb slipped beneath the edge of the envelope, and then I stopped. Some things belong in certain places. Samuel had written that letter for me, not for a conference room with legal books lining the walls and another person sitting 3 feet away. I think I want to read this at home. Jonathan nodded. I think Samuel would understand. I slipped the envelope into my purse. Before leaving, Jonathan gave me copies of the Hawthorne Ridge documents and promised to begin an independent review. Lauren. I stopped at his office door. If Ethan contacts you again, you don't have to discuss any of this with him. He's my son. I know, he's not a stranger trying to cheat me. Jonathan chose his next words carefully. Then give him the opportunity to behave like your son instead of Caldwell's representative. That sentence followed me all the way home. I arrived shortly after noon. The house was quiet. I made tea I did not really want and carried it to the kitchen table. Then I placed Samuel's envelope in front of me. For several minutes I simply stared at his handwriting. Lauren. No last name, no legal terminology. Just the way he had written my name on birthday cards and grocery lists for almost 4 decades. I opened it. Inside were 4 handwritten pages. The first line broke me. My Lauren. If Jonathan is giving you this letter, then somebody finally wants Hawthorne Ridge badly enough to bother you about it. I laughed and cried at the same time. Only Samuel could make me feel both things in one sentence. I continued reading. I should have explained all of this sooner, but I know you. If I told you we owned something that might someday become valuable, you would spend 20 years wondering whether we should sell it, insure it, improve it, worry about it, or save it for Ethan. I wanted you to live your life. I wiped my eyes. He knew me too well. Samuel explained that he had first encountered Hawthorne Ridge through surveying work decades earlier. The land itself had never been extraordinary. It was wooded, uneven in places, and poorly positioned for ordinary residential development at the time. But Samuel had noticed something. Growth around Charlottesville was moving outward. Road improvements were changing development patterns. Large parcels were being assembled. And Hawthorne Ridge sat near a route that might one day become extremely important. Samuel eventually acquired the 31 acres and secured control over the narrow access corridor. Then the name I had been waiting for appeared. Grant Caldwell. About 15 years ago, Caldwell began buying property in the area. At first, Samuel had considered selling. That surprised me. I read the paragraph twice. Grant made a respectable offer and I nearly took it. There is nothing wrong with selling land to someone who sees more value in it than you do. That is business. That sounded exactly like Samuel. He was not sentimental about dirt simply because he had measured it. But the next paragraph changed everything. Then I learned how aggressively some of the surrounding owners were being approached. Most were not wealthy people. Some were older. Some had owned their property for generations. I became concerned that if Caldwell controlled the best access point too early, those people would lose the ability to negotiate from strength. Samuel described one older couple who had lived nearby for more than 40 years. Another owner had inherited family acreage and was unsure whether to sell. Nothing Samuel wrote accused Grant of breaking the law. That mattered. My husband was careful even in a private letter. He did not call Grant corrupt. He did not call him dishonest. He wrote something quieter. Grant Caldwell understands leverage. I decided I did not want to hand him all of it. I leaned back. There was Samuel. That was the man I had married. He rarely spoke about morality in grand speeches. He simply made decisions and lived with them. The letter continued. Grant increased his offer. Samuel refused again. Representatives returned months later. He still refused. Eventually the offer stopped. Samuel believed Caldwell would either redesign future plans or wait. Apparently Grant had chosen to wait. Then I reached the part that mattered most to me. Lauren, if you are reading this, please understand something. I did not keep Hawthorne Ridge because I hated Grant Caldwell, and I am not asking you to fight him because I once did. I read more slowly. If the day comes when selling is right for you, sell it. If keeping it is right, keep it. If you can use it to make sure other people are treated fairly, I would be proud of that too. But whatever you do, make the decision because it is yours. Never let anyone convince you that their urgency creates your obligation. I press because it is yours. Never let anyone convince you that their urgency creates your obligation. I press the letter against the table. Their urgency creates your obligation. That was exactly what Ethan had been doing. The project mattered. His promotion mattered. Grant's schedule mattered. Caldwell's approvals mattered. Therefore, somehow I was expected to sign. Samuel had seen that possibility years before any of us knew Ethan would marry Grant Caldwell's daughter. That realization unsettled me. Had Samuel known Ethan might someday be involved? The next paragraph answered that question. I hope Ethan never becomes part of this. He is a good boy with a hungry heart. Ambition can build a life, but it can also make a person confused being invited into powerful rooms with belonging there. I stopped reading. My hand covered my mouth. Samuel had written those words when Ethan was still building his career. Before Madison, before Caldwell development, before expensive suits and private dinners. A good boy with a hungry heart. I could hear Samuel saying it. I had loved Ethan fiercely. But perhaps fathers see certain things mothers refuse to see. I continued. If Ethan is ever involved, do not assume that protecting yourself means you love him less. Parents spend years teaching children to stand on their own feet. We should remember to stay on ours. That sentence hurt. It also gave me something I had not realized I needed. Permission. For weeks, every time I questioned Ethan, guilt had followed. Maybe I was making his job harder. Maybe I was being stubborn. Maybe a good mother should help her son advance. Samuel was reminding me that motherhood did not require surrender. I finished the final page. There was no secret fortune described, no instructions to punish anyone, no dramatic revelation. Only this: you have spent your life giving people more than they asked for. Just once, if this land ever matters, I want you to remember that you are allowed to ask what something is worth before you give it away. And underneath whatever you choose, choose freely. Love always, Samuel. I sat alone at the table and cried. Not loudly. The kind of crying that comes when grief and gratitude arrive together. After a while, I folded the letter carefully. My phone rang. Ethan. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. Hello, Mom. His voice was controlled. Have you contacted a lawyer? I looked at Samuel's letter. Why are you asking? Grant's legal team heard someone requested historical documents connected to Hawthorne Ridge. That was fast. Maybe I did. That's between my lawyer and me. Mom, come on. No. He went silent. Then his tone changed. Is it Mercer? I felt cold. How do you know Jonathan Mercer? Another pause. I've seen the name in old records. Grant knows him too, doesn't he? I don't know. Yes, you do. Mom, this is getting out of control. No, Ethan. For the first time, I think it's getting under control. He exhaled sharply. What did Mercer tell you that I shouldn't sign anything until I understand what I own? You already knew that. No. You told me the opposite. I told you the paperwork was routine. It wasn't. You're turning technical details into some kind of betrayal. I closed my eyes. Did you know Caldwell tried to buy Hawthorne Ridge from your father years ago? Silence. Not surprise. Silence. My stomach dropped. Ethan. I heard something about an old negotiation. When I don't remember. Before you brought me those papers. He did not answer. That was my answer. I felt a sadness deeper than anger. You knew. Not everything. But you knew Grant had wanted it before. I knew there had been discussions. And you still told me the property barely mattered. Mom, I was trying to keep this simple. For whom everyone. No, for Grant. That's unfair. And for you. His voice hardened. Yes, my career matters to me. I'm not ashamed of that. You shouldn't be. He seemed surprised. I'm proud that you're ambitious, I said. I always have been. Then why are you fighting me? I'm not. It feels like you are. I'm protecting myself. From your own son. The question was meant to wound me. It worked. But Samuel's letter was still beneath my hand. I hope I never have to protect myself from my son, I said quietly. But I will protect myself from anyone who asks me to sign something without telling me the truth. Ethan said nothing. Then he asked, what does Mercer think it's worth? I don't know yet. Grant can improve the offer. That's interesting. Why? Because 3 days ago, $240,000 was supposedly generous for something almost worthless. Markets aren't that simple. Neither am I. He exhaled. Please don't make any decisions until we talk. I won't. He sounded relieved. Then I added, but when I make one, it will be mine. I ended the call. That afternoon, Jonathan called with an update. His team had confirmed something important. Someone representing Caldwell's interests had contacted parties connected to old Hawthorne Ridge records weeks before Ethan first asked me about Samuel's papers. So this started before Ethan came to me. Yes. How long before? At least several weeks. I looked toward Samuel's letter. Grant had not discovered Hawthorne Ridge because Ethan mentioned it. Caldwell had been looking first. Ethan had been sent toward me afterward. Jonathan continued. There's more. What the inquiry specifically asked, whether the Pierce family trust remained enforceable and whether its beneficiary had independent authority to transfer the corridor rights. I felt my chest tighten. They were asking about me. Without using your name initially, yes. Grant Caldwell had known. Perhaps not every detail, but he had known enough to investigate whether I controlled the one piece his development still needed. And instead of approaching me openly, the problem had somehow become my son's responsibility. I looked again at Samuel's final words. Whatever you choose, choose freely. For the first time since Ethan joined Caldwell Development, I understood the real conflict ahead of me. It was not Lauren Pierce against Grant Caldwell. It was not even mother against son. It was a question of whether I would allow other people's money urgency and ambition to decide what I owed them. Samuel had already answered that question for himself 15 years earlier. Now it was my turn. Grant Caldwell did not send Ethan the next time. He called me himself. It happened 4 days after my conversation with Jonathan Mercer. I was in the backyard trying to decide whether Samuel's old wooden shed needed another coat of paint or whether I was finally ready to replace it. My phone rang. Lauren, this is Grant Caldwell. I looked at the peeling door in front of me. I know. I was hoping you might have time to meet tomorrow. About Hawthorne Ridge. There was a brief pause. Yes. At least we had finally stopped pretending. Where? My office, if that's convenient. I almost laughed at the word convenient. Nothing about this had been convenient. What time? 11, I'll be there. I called Jonathan immediately afterward. Do you want me to come with you? He asked. I considered it. No. Are you sure I'm not signing anything? Good. I want to hear what Grant says when he has to say it directly to me. Jonathan was quiet for a moment. That may be useful. Is there anything I should avoid discussing? You are not obligated to disclose our valuation work, your intentions, or any legal strategy. I don't have a legal strategy. You have something better. What the right to say you need time. I smiled. Samuel would have liked Jonathan. The next morning, I drove myself to Caldwell Development Group's Richmond headquarters. I had been there twice before for family events, but never for business. The building was all glass, polished stone, and controlled silence. A receptionist greeted me by name before I introduced myself. That told me Grant was expecting me very specifically. Mr. Caldwell is ready for you. His office occupied a corner of the top floor. The view alone probably cost more than my house. Grant stood when I entered. Lauren, Grant. He shook my hand. No condescension, no distracted glance toward his phone. No expression suggesting he was tolerating his son-in-law's ordinary mother. For the first time since I had met him, Grant Caldwell looked at me as though I belonged in the room. Money had not changed me overnight, but apparently the possibility that I controlled something he needed had changed him. Coffee, he asked. No, thank you. Water, I'm fine. He gestured toward a seating area rather than his desk. 2 leather chairs faced one another beside a low table. A folder sat between them. Of course there was a folder. I sat. Grant remained standing for a moment, looking out over Richmond. Then he turned. I understand there's been some confusion surrounding Hawthorne Ridge. Confusion. Perhaps that's the wrong word. It is. A faint smile appeared. Fair enough. He sat across from me. I think Ethan approached this badly. That surprised me. Did he? Yes. Did you ask him to? Grant did not answer immediately. I asked Ethan to help determine whether an old title issue could be resolved within the family. Yes. Your family or mine? His expression shifted slightly. You're direct. I spent too many weeks listening to indirect answers. Grant nodded. Then let's be direct. Please. He opened the folder. Caldwell Development would like to acquire all remaining interests associated with Hawthorne Ridge, including the corridor rights controlled through the Pierce Family Trust. That was already more honesty than Ethan had given me. And we are prepared to offer $4.8 million. For several seconds, I genuinely thought I had misheard him. 4.8 million, yes. I stared at him. The number did something strange to my mind. I thought of my mortgage long since paid, Samuel's old truck, years of comparing grocery prices, the retirement account I checked carefully every month, $4.8 million. Then another number appeared beside it. 240,000. You increased the offer by more than $4.5 million in less than 2 weeks. The initial offer reflected a different understanding, whose Grant's eyes remained calm. Lauren, negotiations evolve. So does the truth, apparently. He leaned back. I'm not interested in arguing over how this began. I am. Why? Because my son came into my kitchen and told me something worth $4.8 million was practically useless. Grant's expression did not change. The land itself is not worth $4.8 million, then what are you buying? Certainty. That answer was good. Probably because it was true. Explain. Grant folded his hands. Our project involves multiple parcels, transportation planning, infrastructure commitments, lender requirements, county approvals, and construction schedules. Hawthorne Ridge simplifies several of those issues. Simplifies, yes. Jonathan Mercer says the corridor may be the most practical access route to the state highway. A tiny movement crossed Grant's face at Jonathan's name. So you have spoken with Mercer? I have. I assumed as much. You knew Samuel used him. Years ago, you tried to buy this from my husband. Grant looked at me for a long moment. Yes. There it was. No denial, no evasion. Why didn't you tell Ethan I did not consider an unsuccessful negotiation from 15 years ago relevant to him? But it was relevant to me. You weren't involved then. I'm involved now. Yes. His tone was almost respectful. That unsettled me more than arrogance would have. I asked, why did Samuel refuse you? Grant's jaw tightened slightly. You have his version. I asked for yours. He looked toward the windows. Samuel believed I was assembling too much leverage in the area. Was he wrong in development control matters? That sounds like no. Grant smiled without humor. Your husband and I viewed business differently. Samuel thought smaller landowners deserved bargaining power, and I believed a project of sufficient scale could create more value for the entire area. By making sure you controlled the access first. By reducing uncertainty. There was that word again. Certainty. Grant Caldwell did not want dirt. He wanted uncertainty removed, and Samuel had left that uncertainty to me. Grant slid the folder toward me. The offer is straightforward. $4.8 million subject to standard closing conditions. I did not open it. Why now? Because I prefer resolving matters efficiently. No. Why is it worth that much now? He watched me. Because delays are expensive. How expensive? Potentially more expensive than this offer. That was the first time I truly understood my position. I was not holding a lottery ticket. I was holding time. Grant needed it. And time in his world had a price. Does Ethan know about this offer? Yes. And what happens to him if I accept? Grant's expression became guarded. That is a separate matter. Is it? Yes. Ethan told me this project could change his future at Caldwell. It could. How he has demonstrated strong leadership. That wasn't my question. Grant waited. I continued. Is Ethan being considered for senior partner? His silence answered before his words did. There have been discussions. Does closing Hawthorne Ridge help him? Successful execution helps everyone associated with the project. I almost smiled. You're very good at saying yes without saying yes. I've had practice. At least he knew. I looked at the folder again. $4.8 million. A month earlier, I would have struggled to imagine refusing such an amount. But Samuel's letter had changed the question. It was no longer simply whether $4.8 million was a lot of money. Of course it was. The question was whether it was fair, and whether I was being given the whole truth. I won't decide today. Grant's expression hardened slightly. This is a serious offer. I know. It may not remain available indefinitely. That's fine. You should understand the project timeline matters. To you. To hundreds of people. Then perhaps someone should have approached me honestly before sending my son with signature tabs. Grant's eyes sharpened. I did not instruct Ethan to mislead you. Did you tell him what the corridor was worth to Caldwell? I discussed the importance of resolving it? That wasn't my question. Grant leaned forward. Lauren, let me give you some advice. I have a lawyer for that. This isn't legal advice. Then I'm listening. Do not let old grievances that belong to Samuel become yours. My stomach tightened. This has nothing to do with revenge. I hope not. I don't hate you, Grant. Good. I barely know you. That seemed to surprise him. I'm not keeping Hawthorne Ridge because Samuel once refused you. I'm making sure I understand what I own before I sell it. 4.8 million should give you a fairly good indication. It gives me an indication of what you're willing to pay. His eyes narrowed. That isn't always the same as what something is worth. For the first time, Grant Caldwell looked irritated. Not angry, just unaccustomed to hearing that sentence from someone he had previously dismissed. I stood. I'll have Jonathan review the offer. Grant stood too. Of course. I reached for my purse. Then he said, Lauren. I turned. Ethan has worked very hard to establish himself here. I know. He has a real future. I hope so. This project is important to that future. There was the pressure, not shouted, not threatened, simply placed carefully on the table between us. I looked at him. Are you asking me to sell my property so my son gets promoted? No. Good. I started toward the door. Grant's voice followed me. Your son understands what's at stake even if you don't. I stopped. For a moment I considered walking away. Instead I turned. Grant, I think that may be exactly where you're wrong. His expression remained still. I continued. Ethan understands what he wants. You understand what your company wants. I placed my hand on the door, and I'm finally beginning to understand what Samuel wanted me to have. What's that, a choice? I left. Ethan called before I reached the parking garage. I looked at his name on the screen. For several seconds I considered ignoring him. Then I answered. Mom, how did it go? You already know. Grant said he made you the offer. He did. 4.8 million, Mom. That's incredible. It's certainly different from $240,000. Silence. Can we not go back to that? I think we should. The first offer was preliminary. You told me it was generous. It was based on stop. He did. Ethan, did you know Grant would eventually pay millions? I knew the corridor mattered. That's not what I asked. Another silence. I closed my eyes. My son had become remarkably skilled at answering me without speaking. Then his voice softened. Mom, this could solve everything. For whom? For all of us. All of us. Yes. You mean Caldwell gets the corridor, you get your promotion, and I get enough money to stop asking questions. That's not fair. Then tell me what I got wrong. His frustration rose. You're acting like everyone is trying to steal from you. No. I'm acting like the owner of something people want. You didn't even know you owned it a month ago. That hurt. Not because it weakened my position, because I heard contempt in his voice. I know now. Because Mercer filled your head with Dad's old grudges. Jonathan gave me documents. Grant is offering you almost $5 million. And I haven't said no. Then say yes. Why are you so desperate? I'm not desperate. Yes, Ethan. You are. He went quiet. Then he said something I would remember long after the call ended. You have no idea what it took for me to get this close. Close. Not to happiness, not to security, to Grant, to status, to the world he had spent years trying to enter. I suddenly understood that Hawthorne Ridge was not merely threatening a project, it was testing my son. And Ethan had already decided which side he wanted to stand on. I'll speak to you later, I said. Mom. I ended the call. As I sat in my car beneath Caldwell Development's gleaming tower, I thought about Samuel's warning. Ambition can build a life, but it can also make a person confuse being invited into powerful rooms with belonging there. Ethan believed he was almost inside, and I was beginning to fear what he might sacrifice to make sure the door did not close. Ethan came to my house 2 nights after my meeting with Grant. He did not call first. At 8:15, I heard a car door slam outside, followed by footsteps across the porch. When I opened the door, my son was standing beneath the porch light in a dark suit, his tie loosened and anger written plainly across his face. Can we talk? That depends. On what? Whether you came here as my son, or as Grant Caldwell's employee. His jaw tightened. Mom. I stepped aside. He walked past me into the living room. I closed the door. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan turned. Jonathan sent Grant's lawyers a notice. What notice? That you're conducting an independent valuation and reviewing the corridor rights. I asked him to. Why? Because I want to know what I own. You already know what you own. No. I know what Grant is willing to pay. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. This is exactly what I was afraid of. What that Mercer would turn this into a battle. Jonathan hasn't turned anything into a battle. He's slowing everything down. He's doing his job. The project has deadlines. Then perhaps Caldwell should have handled this properly months ago. Ethan stared at me. You really don't understand what you're doing. There was that sentence again, the one he used whenever I stopped being convenient. I walked into the kitchen. If you're going to insult me, at least sit down while you do it. I'm not insulting you. You keep telling a 68-year-old woman she doesn't understand her own decisions. It starts to feel insulting after a while. He followed me. I poured myself tea. I did not offer him any. That sounds petty. Maybe it was. But for most of his life, whenever Ethan walked into my kitchen, I automatically fed him, poured him something, asked whether he was tired. That night, I wanted to see whether he remembered how to ask. He did not. Grant offered you $4.8 million, he said. I remember. Most people would consider that life-changing. It is. Then what are we doing? You know what I mean. No, Ethan. I'm starting to realize I often don't. He pulled out a chair. Fine. What are you doing getting an appraisal? For what purpose? To determine a fair value. You're not selling a suburban house. There is no simple market value for something like this. Jonathan said the same thing. Then what's the point? Understanding my bargaining position. Ethan stared at me. I watched the realization move across his face. He had not expected those words from me. Perhaps he still saw the woman who compared prices at the grocery store and waited for department store sales. He had forgotten I had spent 27 years managing contracts, invoices, payroll issues, suppliers, and men who sometimes assumed the woman behind the desk did not understand business. I knew what leverage meant. Samuel had known too. You're trying to squeeze, Grant, Ethan said. No, that's exactly what this sounds like. I'm trying not to be squeezed by Grant. He made you a generous offer. You said $240,000 was generous. That was before I hired a lawyer. He stopped. I leaned forward. Do you understand why that bothers me? The initial offer was based on a different structure. Explain the different structure. His silence returned. I shook my head. You still can't, because there are legal and development issues I'm not authorized to discuss. Then stop asking me to make decisions based on information you refuse to provide. Ethan stood and began pacing. This project could define my career. Finally. No pretending. No technical language. Just the truth. I know. Do you? Yes. Because you're acting like it doesn't matter. It matters to you. I'm your son. And he stared at me. I had never responded that way before, and I thought my future mattered to you. The words landed exactly where he intended. I felt them, but I did not surrender to them. Your future has mattered to me since before you knew what the word meant. Then why are you doing this? Doing what? Dragging this out? I've been reviewing the property for less than 2 weeks. Every week matters. To Grant. To me. There it was. I put down my cup. Tell me what happens if the project closes smoothly. Ethan looked away. What do you mean? You know exactly what I mean. Grant mentioned senior partner. His eyes returned to mine. He told you that he said there had been discussions. Ethan said nothing. Is that what this is about? It's not just a title. Then tell me. He sat again. For the first time that evening, his anger weakened. I've worked 6 years to get where I am. I know. People think I married into it. Did you know? His answer came sharply. I work harder than anyone on my team. I believe you. That seemed to confuse him. Grant doesn't hand out positions because someone married his daughter, Ethan continued. If anything, he expects more from me. I can imagine. This project was my chance to prove I could handle something at the highest level. and Hawthorne Ridge became part of that test. Yes. The word was almost whispered. I felt sadness rather than triumph. Did Grant tell you to get my signature? He told me to resolve the issue. How he didn't care. Did he tell you the truth about what Samuel owned? Not at first. When did you learn? Ethan looked at the table. Enough of it. Before you brought me those papers. His jaw tightened. Yes, I had already suspected it. Hearing him admit it still hurt. You knew. I knew the corridor mattered. And you told me it was routine. I was trying to avoid exactly this. This meaning, me getting independent advice. This meaning, lawyers, appraisers, delays, and you suddenly treating Grant like an enemy because Dad had some disagreement with him 15 years ago. Samuel's disagreement has nothing to do with my decision. Of course it does. Mercer gave you that letter. My eyes narrowed. How do you know about the letter? Ethan froze. A long silence followed. Grant mentioned Samuel had left instructions. That wasn't my question. Mom. How do you know Jonathan gave me a letter? I assumed. No, you didn't. His face tightened. I felt something cold move through me. How much has Grant told you about Samuel? Not much. Enough to know about private estate instructions. I don't know what's private and what isn't. I stared at him. Then I asked the question I had been avoiding. Are you asking me to give up what your father protected, so you can earn your father-in-law's approval? Ethan stood so quickly the chair scraped against the floor. That is not what this is about. Then what is it about my life? His voice filled the kitchen. He immediately lowered it, but the words had already come. My career, my marriage, my future. Everything I've spent years building. And you think I'm threatening all of that? You are standing in the way of a project that could change everything. No. Hawthorne Ridge is standing in the way. I simply happen to control it. That's semantics. No, Ethan. That's ownership. He stared at me. I saw anger, fear, and underneath both something worse. Resentment. You could solve this tomorrow, he said. I could. Then why won't you? Because the fact that I can help you does not mean you have the right to demand that I do it on your terms. I'm not demanding. You came here angry because I hired my own appraiser. Because you're making this unnecessarily complicated. According to whom everyone who actually understands development. There it was again. I smiled sadly. You know your father used to bring you to surveying sites when you were a teenager. What does that have to do with anything? He wanted you to understand land. I understand land. No. I think he wanted you to understand something else. Ethan laughed bitterly. Here we go. What does that mean, Dad? Always Dad. I stared at him. He's dead, Mom. The room changed. Ethan seemed to hear his own words only after they were spoken. My chest tightened. I know. His expression softened. I didn't mean it like that. There seem to be a lot of things you don't mean. He looked away. I stood. I think you should go. Mom, please. No. He did not move. Then he said, You've never understood the kind of life I'm trying to build. I looked at him, the boy I had raised, the man I barely recognized, and suddenly I was tired of defending myself. I understood the life I built for you. His face changed. I continued quietly. Your father and I built you a life where you never had to wonder whether there would be food in the refrigerator. We saved for college. We taught you to work. We gave you every opportunity we could afford. I know that. Do you? Of course. Because lately you talk about where you came from as if it's something that happened to you instead of something people sacrificed to give you. That's not fair. No, it's not. My voice trembled now. But neither is what you're doing to me. Ethan picked up his keys. At the doorway he stopped. If you keep pushing Grant on this, don't expect me to keep pretending everything between us is normal. I stared at him. What does that mean? It means I'm tired of being caught between you and my family. For a second I thought I had misheard. Your family, Madison, the life we have. And what am I? That's not what I meant. Then say what you mean. He looked exhausted. If you keep fighting Grant, maybe it's better if you don't come to the house for a while. I felt as though someone had struck me. You're banning me from your home. I'm asking for space. Because I won't sell my property on Grant's schedule. Because you're turning everything into a conflict. I nodded slowly. All right. He looked surprised. That's it. What would you like me to do? Ethan begged. I didn't say that. No. But I think you expected me to become frightened enough to cooperate. His face hardened. You always make yourself the victim. That sentence ended something inside me. Not my love for him. That remained. Perhaps it always would. But the instinct to rescue him from the consequences of his own choices weakened. I opened the front door. Good night, Ethan. He walked onto the porch. Then he turned. Grant isn't going to wait forever. I looked at my son beneath the same porch light that had illuminated him coming home from high school, dances, college holidays, and his father's funeral. Then Grant can make whatever decision is best for Grant. And me, I swallowed. You can make whatever decision is best for Ethan. He stared at me. I closed the door. Only after his car disappeared did I cry. But the next morning I called Jonathan. Continue the valuation. Are you sure? Yes. And if Caldwell pressures you, I looked toward Samuel's photograph on the mantel. They already have. Jonathan paused. Did it work? I thought about Ethan telling me I was no longer welcome in his home. No. But I knew it was not over. Ethan had chosen his side privately. Soon he would be given an opportunity to choose it publicly, and that choice would hurt far more than anything he had said in my kitchen. For 12 days after Ethan told me not to come to his house, I heard nothing from him. No phone call, no apology, not even one of those meaningless messages people send when they want to pretend a relationship is still alive without actually repairing it. I told myself the silence was good. It gave me time. Jonathan's team continued reviewing Hawthorne Ridge. Independent appraisers examined the land. A transportation consultant studied Caldwell's proposed access route. Jonathan handled communication with Grant's attorneys, so I no longer had to listen to Ethan explain why every delay was somehow my fault. My house became peaceful again. But peace and loneliness can sound very similar when you are 68 and your only child has stopped calling. Every morning I made coffee for one. Every evening I passed photographs of Ethan at different ages. Baseball uniform, high school graduation, Virginia Tech, his wedding. I never removed them. I was angry with my son. I was not trying to erase him. That was the difference between us. On the 13th day, Madison called. Lauren. Her voice was careful. Hello, Madison. I was hoping we could talk. I'm listening. She paused. I hate what's happening. So do I. Ethan's under enormous pressure. I closed my eyes. There it was again. Pressure. Always pressure. Never choice. I understand that. Grant is under pressure too. The project has financing deadlines. I understand that as well. And I know you feel like people haven't been completely transparent. Feel like another pause. You're right. That came out badly. Yes. She exhaled. I don't want this to destroy our family. I almost asked which family she meant. I stopped myself. What are you suggesting? Dinner. I laughed softly. Dinner at Dad's house. Just the four of us. Madison Hawthorne Ridge is being handled by attorneys now. I know. This isn't supposed to be a negotiation. I did not believe that. But something in her voice sounded sincere. Ethan misses you. That hurt more than I expected. Then he knows my number. He's proud. So am I. I know. She became quiet. Then she said, please come. Maybe if everyone sits down without lawyers, we can remember we're family. Family. That word still had power over me. Perhaps too much. I agreed. The dinner was scheduled for Saturday evening at Grant's estate outside Richmond. I almost canceled twice. Jonathan did not tell me what to do. He simply said, do not sign anything. I'm not bringing a pen. He laughed. Samuel would approve. Saturday evening, I drove through the gates of the Caldwell property shortly before 7. The house glowed against the darkening sky. I had been there many times before, but that evening, it seemed less like a home and more like a monument to certainty. Everything was controlled. Landscaping, lighting, security, even silence. Madison met me near the entrance. She hugged me. I hesitated, then hugged her back. Thank you for coming. Where's Ethan? In the dining room. Grant was there too. Of course he was. The moment I saw the leather folder beside his plate, I knew Madison had either lied to me or had been lied to herself. Ethan stood when I entered. Mom. Ethan. He looked tired. For one dangerous second, maternal instinct almost took over. I wanted to touch his face and ask whether he was sleeping. Instead, I sat. Dinner began politely, painfully politely. Grant asked about my drive. Madison discussed a charity event. Ethan commented on the weather. No one mentioned Hawthorne Ridge for almost 20 minutes. Then Grant placed his napkin beside his plate. Lauren, I think we should address the obvious. I looked at Madison. Her face tightened. Dad said, we cannot solve anything by pretending it doesn't exist. I turned to Grant. What would you like to address the valuation process? Jonathan is handling that. Yes, extensively. I almost smiled. Is there a problem? The process is delaying certainty. Your favorite word. Grant ignored that. Our $4.8 million offer remains open. I'm aware. It is more than fair. My appraisal isn't finished. Independent appraisers can produce whatever number their client wants. That sounds like something you should tell your own appraisers. Ethan closed his eyes. Mom. What can we please not turn this into another fight? I didn't bring up the property. Grant leaned forward. The project cannot remain uncertain indefinitely. Then Caldwell should prepare an alternative. You know alternatives are inefficient. That sounds like a business problem. His expression cooled. This affects Ethan. There it was. Finally. I looked at my son. Does it? Ethan stared at his plate. Grant continued. He has been responsible for resolving this matter. Why? Because he had a relationship with the beneficiary. A relationship. Not because he was qualified. Because he was my son. I looked at Ethan. Did you know that was why he gave you responsibility? Ethan's jaw tightened. I was already part of the project. That wasn't my question. Mom, stop. Stop what? Trying to make Grant look like he manipulated me. I sat back. I don't need to make anyone look like anything. Madison reached for Ethan's arm. Maybe we should take a break. He pulled away. No. His voice was sharper now. No, I'm tired of this. I looked at him. Of what? Everything revolving around Mom's feelings. My chest tightened. Ethan. No, seriously. We've spent weeks doing this. Doing what? Pretending this is about fairness. What do you think it's about? Control. The word hung between us. Grant said nothing. Madison looked frightened. I asked quietly, you think I'm doing this for control? I think you like finally having something Grant needs. That hurt, more than the insults. More than being told I did not understand business, because Ethan knew me. Or I had believed he did. You really think that I think Dad's letter got into your head? Your father told me to make my own decision. He also spent years holding onto a grudge. You don't know what he did. I know enough. No, Ethan. You know what Grant told you. Grant's face hardened. That's enough. I turned toward him. This is between my son and me. Not when you're accusing me of poisoning him against his father. I didn't say that. You implied it. Ethan pushed his chair back. See, this is exactly what I mean. He stood. You walk into every room acting like everyone is trying to take something from you. I stared up at him. You brought documents into my kitchen without telling me what they were worth. I was trying to resolve a title problem. For your boss. For my family. I stood too. Which family, Ethan? He froze. Madison whispered, Lauren, please. But I needed the answer. You told me not to come to your house because I wouldn't do what Grant wanted. Now I'm sitting here being pressured again. So tell me. Which family? Ethan looked at Grant. Just once. But I saw it. He was checking. Seeking approval. Something inside me broke quietly. Then Ethan said, Madison is my wife. I know. The Caldwells have supported my career. I know. They've given me opportunities I never would have had otherwise. I know. And you keep putting me in a position where I have to choose. No. My voice was barely above a whisper. I never asked you to choose. You don't have to say it. I asked you to tell me the truth. You turned a business transaction into a loyalty test. I hired a lawyer. You challenged Grant. I protected my property. You embarrassed me. There it was, the oldest wound. Not money, not land. Embarrassment. The navy dress. Samuel's truck. Our old kitchen. The stories about mowing lawns. Everything Ethan had spent years trying to escape. I looked at my son. Are you ashamed of me? His face changed. Madison said, Lauren. No. I want him to answer. Ethan looked away. That's not what this is about. Then look at me. He did. Are you ashamed that I'm your mother? No. Are you ashamed of where you came from? No. Then why have you spent years asking me to hide it? His face flushed. This isn't going anywhere. No, it isn't. I reached for my purse. Then Ethan said, maybe it's better if we stop doing this altogether. I turned. What does that mean? He swallowed. Then he looked at Grant again. When he spoke, his voice was controlled. I don't want you interfering in my life anymore. The room went silent. Madison stared at him. Ethan. He continued. If you're going to keep fighting the people who are actually part of my future, then maybe we need to accept that we're not part of each other's lives anymore. I felt the floor disappear beneath me. Your future. Yes. And what am I? He said nothing. I looked at Grant. The billionaire did not smile. He did not need to. Ethan was doing exactly what he believed was required. I turned back to my son. Say it clearly. His eyes met mine. I don't want you coming to our house. I don't want you calling Madison. I don't want you involved in our decisions. Anything else? His voice became quieter. Madison and the Caldwells are my family now. Madison's face went pale. Ethan, I never asked you to say that. He ignored her. I could hear my heartbeat. I remembered holding him when he had chickenpox, waiting outside the emergency room when he broke his arm, driving 3 hours to college because he had the flu and insisted he was fine. Standing beside him at Samuel's funeral while he cried into my shoulder. All of motherhood reduced to one sentence. They are my family now. I refused to cry. Not there. I picked up my coat. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Are you sure this is what you want? For 1 second something flickered across his face. Fear, regret, maybe love. Then he looked toward Grant. Yes. I nodded. All right. I turned toward the door. Madison stood. Lauren, wait. No, sweetheart. My voice almost broke. You don't need to fix what you didn't break. I took 2 steps. Then the dining room door opened. The butler stood there. Mrs. Pierce. I stopped. There's a gentleman asking for you. At this hour, he says it concerns your husband's estate. Grant's head lifted sharply. Who? The butler looked toward me. Jonathan Mercer. The silence changed instantly. I turned. Jonathan stepped into the room carrying a leather briefcase. His eyes found mine first, then Ethan, then Grant. Grant Caldwell's face lost its color. Mercer, he said. Jonathan gave him a small nod. Grant. Ethan stared between them. You two know each other. Neither man answered him. Jonathan walked toward me. I'm sorry to interrupt, Lauren, but this couldn't wait. What happened? He placed the briefcase on the table. Then he looked directly at me. It concerns Samuel's estate. Grant stood. What exactly concerns it? Jonathan did not look at him. Instead, he opened the briefcase. Hawthorne Ridge. Grant's hand tightened against the back of his chair. Jonathan removed a sealed legal packet. Then he said the words that changed the balance of power in that room. Lauren, the final restriction. Samuel placed on the Pierce Family Trust expired this afternoon. I stared at him. What does that mean? Jonathan finally looked at Grant. It means Mrs. Pierce now has full controlling authority over Hawthorne Ridge and the access corridor. No one spoke. And for the first time that evening, Ethan stopped looking at Grant for answers. He looked at me. For several seconds after Jonathan spoke, nobody moved. The dining room that had felt enormous when I entered suddenly seemed too small for all the silence inside it. Ethan stared at me. Madison stared at her father. Grant Caldwell stared at Jonathan Mercer. and I stood beside the table with my coat still folded over my arm, trying to understand the sentence I had just heard. Full controlling authority. What exactly does that mean? I asked. Jonathan placed the sealed legal packet on the table. It means the final management restriction Samuel placed on the Pierce Family Trust has expired, according to the timetable established in the trust agreement. I thought I already controlled the property. You were always the primary beneficiary. But until today, certain transfers and amendments involving the corridor required trustee review under Samuel's protective provisions. And now those restrictions are gone. He looked directly at me. You have full authority to decide what happens to Hawthorne Ridge and the access rights. I felt something strange. Not excitement, not triumph. Wait. The kind that comes when a decision stops belonging to paperwork and starts belonging entirely to you. Ethan finally spoke. Wait. His voice sounded smaller than it had 10 minutes earlier. Dad did this. Yes, Jonathan said. Why today? Because Samuel specified a fixed management period following his death. Why? Jonathan looked at him. To protect your mother from exactly the kind of pressure she has recently experienced. Ethan's face changed. Grant stepped forward. I think we should be careful with characterizations. Jonathan turned toward him. I didn't characterize anything. You implied Caldwell Development has pressured Lauren improperly. I stated that Samuel designed the trust to prevent rushed decisions under external pressure. That structure was created years before this project reached its current stage. Yes, so suggesting it was designed for this situation is misleading. Jonathan's expression remained calm. Samuel specifically referenced renewed acquisition efforts involving Hawthorne Ridge. That silenced Grant. Ethan looked between them. Dad knew Caldwell might come back. Yes. How Jonathan answered simply, because Caldwell had come before. Ethan turned toward Grant. You told me there had been old discussions. Grant's face hardened. There were. You didn't tell me Dad created a trust because of them. I didn't know why your father created his estate plan. Jonathan corrected him. You knew Samuel refused to sell you the corridor. Grant looked at him. That is not the same thing. No, Jonathan said. It isn't. The two men stared at each other. For the first time I understood why Grant had gone pale when Jonathan entered. This was not the first room in which they had stood on opposite sides of Samuel's property. Madison spoke quietly. Dad. How much did you know? Grant turned toward her. Enough to understand the title history. That isn't what I asked, he sighed. Madison, this is a complex development matter. She gave a humorless laugh. That sounds exactly like Ethan. Ethan flinched. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Jonathan opened the legal packet. There is another matter we need to address. Grant's attention snapped back to him. What matter? Jonathan removed several documents. Our review of Caldwell's current project materials has raised concerns regarding the treatment of the Hawthorne Ridge corridor. Grant's voice cooled. Be precise. I intend to. Jonathan looked at me. Lauren, remember when I explained that the corridor is strategically important because of the proposed connection to the state highway? Yes. Caldwell Development has incorporated an anticipated access route through or dependent upon those rights in certain preliminary planning materials. I frowned. But they don't own those rights. No. Then how can they plan around them? Developers frequently prepare projections based on anticipated acquisitions or negotiated access. That is not necessarily improper. Grant nodded. Exactly. Jonathan continued. The issue is certainty. Grant's jaw tightened. I almost smiled. His favorite word had returned against him. What kind of certainty? I asked. Project schedules, infrastructure assumptions, traffic modeling and financing projections can depend on whether planned access will actually be available. Ethan looked uncomfortable. I remembered his accidental admission in my kitchen. Millions in project delays. Did Caldwell tell lenders they owned the corridor? I asked. Jonathan shook his head. I have seen no evidence of that. Grant immediately said, because we did not. Jonathan nodded. I'm not accusing you of fraud, Grant. Good. But some projections appear to assume that corridor access will be resolved. Grant folded his arms, which is normal, until the owner refuses. Silence. Everyone looked at me. I hated that. For weeks, people had discussed Hawthorne Ridge as though it were an engineering problem, a title problem, a financing problem, Ethan's career problem. Now I was the person who could say yes or no. Grant looked at Jonathan. What exactly are you suggesting that, without a legally enforceable agreement from Lauren, your company cannot treat the corridor as guaranteed? We never have. Then there should be no difficulty adjusting your projections to reflect uncertainty. Grant said nothing. That was when I understood. Jonathan was not threatening him. He did not need to. The facts were doing the work. Ethan stepped closer to the table. How bad could the delay be? Grant answered before Jonathan could. We are not discussing internal projections. Ethan looked at him. I'm part of the project, not at this level. The sentence was cold. I saw Ethan absorb it. For years he had tried to become part of Grant's inner circle. One sentence reminded him he was still standing outside certain doors. Jonathan looked at Ethan. Alternative access may be possible. How long? That would depend on redesign negotiations with other owners, local approvals, traffic requirements, and possibly new infrastructure. Months potentially, a year potentially. Ethan went pale. Grant interrupted. This speculation is not productive. Jonathan calmly reorganized the documents. Then we agree on something. Grant looked toward me. Lauren, our offer remains valid. I almost laughed. Minutes earlier, my son had disowned me at this table. Now Grant was returning to business as though nothing had happened. Tonight? What you really want to negotiate with me tonight, I want clarity. I looked at Ethan. He lowered his eyes. You just watched my son tell me I was no longer his family. Grant's expression remained controlled. That is between you and Ethan. 10 minutes ago you were telling me this project affected him. It does. So when his relationship with me helps Caldwell, we're family. When it becomes uncomfortable, it's between us. Grant did not answer. Madison whispered, Lauren, I'm sorry. I looked at her. I know. And I believed her. She had not looked victorious when Ethan disowned me. She had looked horrified. Jonathan closed the packet. Lauren, you do not need to make any decision tonight. Grant exhaled sharply. I am aware. Jonathan looked at him. I was speaking to my client. My client. 2 ordinary words. But they mattered. For weeks, I had been Ethan's mother. Grant's obstacle. Caldwell's title issue. Now I was someone represented independently. Someone whose interests mattered on their own. Ethan finally looked at me. Mom. I did not answer. Did you know this was happening today? No. You didn't plan for Mercer to come here. The question hurt almost enough to make me laugh. You think I arranged some dramatic entrance? I don't know what to think. That seems to be a problem lately. His face fell. Mom, no. I raised my hand. You made your decision before Jonathan walked through that door. He swallowed. I was angry. You were very clear. I said things you said I wasn't your family. Madison looked down. Grant remained silent. Ethan's voice cracked slightly. I shouldn't have said that. No. I felt tears threatening again. You shouldn't have believed it long enough to say it. He stepped toward me. I stepped back. That stopped him. Jonathan watched without interfering. I need to leave, I said. Grant spoke. Lauren, before you go, I would strongly encourage you not to let tonight's emotions affect a business decision. I turned toward him. For the first time, I did not feel intimidated by Grant Caldwell. Maybe because I finally understood something Samuel had known all along. Power is impressive only until you realize the other person needs something from you. My emotions didn't create the corridor, I said. Grant's expression hardened. My emotions didn't make Caldwell design a project around access it doesn't control. And my emotions didn't send Ethan into my kitchen with papers that would have released rights nobody had properly explained to me. I have already told you I did not instruct Ethan to mislead you. Then perhaps you should ask why he thought misleading me was the best way to impress you. That landed, not just on Grant, on Ethan. He looked away. I put on my coat. Jonathan gathered the documents. I'll walk you out. We reached the hallway before Ethan called after me. Mom. I stopped but did not turn. I'm sorry. My eyes closed. For most of my life, those words from my son would have made me turn around. Not that night. I believe you're sorry this hurts, I said. Then I looked back at him. But I don't know yet whether you're sorry for what you chose. He had no answer. Jonathan and I walked outside. The Virginia night was cool and quiet. For a moment I stood beside my car breathing. Jonathan waited. Finally I asked, "How much trouble is Caldwell really in?" Trouble is a strong word. I looked at him. You lawyers love doing that. He smiled. Caldwell has options. But their preferred plan appears to depend heavily on access. Samuel controlled. How heavily enough that Grant's $4.8 million offer makes considerably more sense now. I looked back at the enormous Caldwell house. What happens if I say no? They redesign. Negotiate elsewhere. Seek approvals. Spend more money. Lose time. Possibly adjust financing. And if I say yes, then you negotiate from a much stronger position than they originally wanted you to understand. I thought about the $240,000 offer, then $4.8 million, then Samuel's letter. Jonathan, yes, I don't want to destroy Grant's project. I know, I don't want revenge. I know that too. But I'm done being treated like the easiest person in the room to pressure. Jonathan nodded. Then don't negotiate from anger. What should I negotiate from information? I looked at him. And when the appraisal comes back, we'll know more. How long? A few days. I nodded. Jonathan started toward his car. Then he stopped. There is one more thing. I almost laughed. There always seems to be. The final trust restriction ending today changes more than your authority to sell. What else? It allows us to complete a full independent valuation of all transferable rights without the previous trustee limitations. And you think the number will be higher than Grant's offer? Jonathan looked back toward the Caldwell estate. I think Grant Caldwell knows exactly how expensive uncertainty can become. 3 days later, I would learn just how expensive. And when the valuation arrived, the number would shock even me. But the money would not be the most important part. For the first time, I would have enough leverage to decide not only what Hawthorne Ridge was worth, I could decide what selling it would require. This is Samuel's fight. No. I shook my head. This is my condition. He studied me for several seconds. What else? I want a community fund. His expression almost became disbelief. What a fund supporting long-term residents affected by major development in the immediate area. Legal consultations, property valuation assistance, transition support where needed. Lauren Caldwell Development is not a charity. No, you have a foundation for that. Jonathan looked down, perhaps hiding a smile. Grant did not. You're attempting to redesign my project through an access agreement. No. I'm deciding what would make me comfortable selling something you need. You may overestimate how badly I need it. Then don't buy it. Silence. That was the moment I knew Samuel had been right. The ability to walk away was the real power. Grant looked at Jonathan. What number? Jonathan gave him a proposed range based on the independent valuation. It was well above $4.8 million, but below the highest estimate. Grant rejected it immediately. Jonathan expected that. The lawyers began discussing easements, transfer structures, liability timing, and infrastructure obligations. For nearly an hour, I listened. I did not understand every technical detail, but I understood enough. And when I did not understand, I asked. Nobody told me I was making things complicated. Nobody told me to simply sign. That alone felt like victory. Finally, Grant asked for a private moment with me. Jonathan looked at me. I nodded. The lawyer stepped outside. Grant remained seated across from me. You've changed. No, I disagree. You met me when you had no reason to pay attention. His expression shifted. That may be fair. It was the closest thing to an admission I expected from him. He looked at Samuel's letter beside my folder. He always was stubborn. So am I. I noticed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Grant said, Ethan told me you were making this personal. I'm sure he did. Is he wrong? I thought about it. Partly. Grant waited. My son lied to me because he wanted your approval. That's personal. Grant's face remained still. But I'm not asking you for more money to punish him. What are you asking for to leave this transaction, knowing I didn't become the kind of person Samuel was trying to protect me from? Grant looked toward the window. You think I'm that person. I think you understand leverage. He looked back at me. A faint, humorless smile appeared. Samuel used to say that. I know. Grant stood. I'll consider the conditions. And the price. And the price. At the door he paused. You should know something about Ethan. My body tensed. What I never promised him senior partnership. I stared at him. He believed you did. I told him successful execution would be noticed. That sounds deliberately vague. It was deliberately accurate. I felt sick. My son was willing to destroy his relationship with me for something you never promised him. Grant's expression hardened. I did not ask Ethan to disown you. No. I believed that, which somehow made it worse. Ethan had done that part himself. After Grant left, Jonathan returned. You all right? No? I looked at the closed door. But I will be. Negotiations continued for another 2 weeks. Grant resisted the community provisions. I refused to remove them. His attorneys proposed narrower protections, Jonathan countered. Eventually, Caldwell agreed to most of what I requested in modified form. The final price was still being negotiated. But something else happened before we reached it. Ethan disappeared from the process. No calls, no emails copied to him, no messages asking me to cooperate. I asked Jonathan why. Grant removed him from the Hawthorne Ridge negotiations. When after our first meeting here, I should have felt satisfied. I did not. I knew exactly what Ethan had sacrificed to become useful to Grant. Now he was no longer useful. 3 evenings later, Madison called. Her voice was strained. Lauren, have you spoken to Ethan? No. He hasn't been himself. What happened? She hesitated. Dad told him he won't be considered for senior partner this year. I closed my eyes. There it was. The prize Ethan had chased. Gone. Why? Dad said Ethan allowed a family matter to compromise his judgment. For a moment I could not speak. Ethan had pressured me to prove himself to Grant. Then Grant had judged him for allowing himself to be compromised by that pressure. The irony was almost cruel. Is Ethan home? No. Where is he? I don't know. That worried me despite everything. Because betrayal does not switch off motherhood. I'll call him. He may not answer. She paused. Lauren, yes. I think he finally understands what he did. I looked at Samuel's photograph across the room. Understanding was not forgiveness. Regret was not repair. But perhaps it was a beginning. The next afternoon, a car pulled into my driveway. Not Ethan's company vehicle. His old personal sedan. I watched from the window. The driver's door opened. Ethan stepped out wearing jeans and a plain blue shirt. No suit, no tie, no Caldwell badge clipped to his belt. He stood beside the car for almost a full minute before walking toward my porch. And for the first time in years, my son came to my door with nothing in his hands. No documents, no offer, no request, only himself. I watched Ethan stand on my porch for almost a full minute before he knocked. He had a key. At least he used to. When Samuel was alive, Ethan never knocked unless it was late. He would open the door, call out Mom, and walk straight toward the kitchen, as though some part of the house still belonged to him. That afternoon he knocked. 3 quiet taps. I opened the door. Hi, Mom. Hello, Ethan. For several seconds we simply looked at each other. He seemed older. Not physically exactly. Deflated might be the better word. Without the tailored suit, expensive watch, and polished confidence he wore at Caldwell Development, I could see traces of the boy who had once stood in this doorway after getting caught skipping school. Can I come in? I stepped aside. Yes. He walked into the living room. His eyes moved toward the family photographs on the mantel. He stopped at the one of him and Samuel beside the old Ford truck. The photograph he had once seemed embarrassed to see displayed. This time he picked it up. I remember that day. I stayed near the doorway. Do you? I complained the entire morning because Dad made me wake up at 5:30. I almost smiled. You complained for 3 days before that morning, too. Ethan gave a small laugh. He made me carry equipment. He said you needed to learn that a job didn't become important just because you wore clean clothes while doing it. Ethan's smile disappeared. He said a lot of things I didn't understand. So did I. He put the photograph back carefully. Then he sat on the couch. I chose the chair across from him, not beside him. He noticed. Neither of us mentioned it. I heard you and Grant are close to an agreement, he said. My body immediately stiffened. He saw it. No. He shook his head. That's not why I came. Then why did you mention it? Because pretending I don't know would be strange. Fair enough. We're still negotiating. I know. How Madison? I nodded. He looked down at his hands. Grant removed me from the project. I heard. Madison told you? Yes. He nodded slowly. And he told me I'm not being considered for senior partner. I heard that too. A bitter smile appeared. I guess news travels. Madison is worried about you. She shouldn't be. She's your wife. Worrying is part of the arrangement. That almost made him smile. Almost. Then silence returned. Finally, Ethan said I was wrong. I had imagined hearing those words. During the nights after the Caldwell dinner, when I lay awake replaying his declaration that they were his family, now I had imagined Ethan returning. In some versions I shouted, in others I made him beg. Sometimes I imagined refusing to open the door. Reality was quieter. I know, I said. His eyes lifted. I don't mean just about the land. I waited. I was wrong about you. Something tightened inside my chest. He leaned forward. I spent years acting like everything about where I came from was something I had to overcome. I said nothing. The house, Dad's business, the way we lived. His eyes moved around the room. I told myself I wasn't ashamed. You told me that too. I was lying. The admission hurt even though I already knew it. I thought if I looked successful enough, nobody would see the kid who grew up mowing lawns for spending money. What was wrong with that kid? Nothing. Then why did you spend so much time hiding him? He swallowed. Because when I first entered Grant's world, I felt like everybody knew I didn't belong. I understood that more than he probably expected. I felt that way at every Caldwell dinner. Ethan looked at me. I know. No, I don't think you did. He lowered his eyes. You're right. I continued. The difference is I didn't need those people to believe I belonged. I did. There it was. The simplest explanation. Not greed, not exactly. Need. I thought if Grant respected me, it meant I had made it. And did he? For a while I thought so. What changed? Ethan laughed bitterly. Hawthorne Ridge. I waited. When the access issue came up, Grant asked whether I knew anything about Dad's old property, so he did send you. Yes. That answer still hurt. He said it would be useful if I could resolve it quietly. Quietly. He didn't tell me to lie. But you did. Yes. His voice was low. I found out the corridor mattered before I brought you those release papers. I know. I knew the $240,000 offer wasn't the whole picture. My throat tightened. Did you know it might be worth millions? Not how many, but enough. Yes. He looked directly at me. I told myself you'd still be better off. I felt anger stir. You decided what was enough for me. Yes. You decided your promotion mattered more than whether I understood what I owned. Yes. Each answer was painful, but at least they were answers. Finally. No excuses, I asked. I have plenty. That surprised me. He continued. I was under pressure. Grant trusted me with the project. People at work were watching. I thought senior partnership was close. I wanted Madison to be proud of me. He shook his head. But none of those things changed what I did. I sat back. That was the first thing he had said that sounded like accountability. Did Grant promise you the partnership? No. I know. His eyes narrowed. He told you yes. Ethan looked away. I heard what I wanted to hear. What did he actually say? That if I demonstrated I could handle complex problems independently, leadership would notice. And you translated that into senior partner. Yes. Why? Because I wanted it. There was no bitterness in his answer, only embarrassment. What did Grant say when he removed you? Ethan stared at the floor. He said I had allowed personal ambition to compromise my judgment. I almost laughed at the cruelty of it. Instead, I asked, was he wrong? No. That answer mattered. He said if I had been thinking like an executive, I would have recognized that pressuring a family member created unnecessary risk. So he blamed you. He blamed my decisions. Ethan paused. And for once I couldn't tell myself someone else was responsible. I looked at him. Grant used you, yes. But you let him, yes. And you used me. His eyes filled, yes. The room became very quiet. Then Ethan said, I'm sorry. I felt tears rise, but I held them back. I believe you. Hope appeared on his face. I stopped it before it could grow too quickly. But believing you're sorry doesn't mean everything goes back to normal. I know. Do you? Yes. He leaned back. I didn't come here expecting you to forgive me. Then why did you come? His answer took several seconds. Because I realized if I waited until I had something to ask for, I'd prove I hadn't learned anything. That reached me. I studied him. Are you here because Grant rejected you partly? At least he was honest. If he had made you senior partner, would you be sitting here? His face tightened. I don't know. That was not the answer a mother wants. It was probably the truest answer he could give. Thank you for not lying. I've done enough of that. I looked toward Samuel's photograph. Your father worried about you. I know that now. No. He worried about your ambition. Ethan's eyes moved to me. He wrote that you had a hungry heart. Ethan smiled faintly. That sounds like Dad. He didn't think ambition was bad. I know. He thought you might confuse being invited into powerful rooms with belonging there. Ethan looked down. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said I disowned the one person who never asked me to prove I belonged. My composure almost... I swallowed. Yes. I don't know how to fix that. You don't. He looked up. Not today, I added. Something in his face softened. What do I do? Stop asking me. He looked confused. I spent your whole childhood telling you what to do. You're 42 now. If you want to rebuild something, figure out what rebuilding looks like. He nodded. Okay. And Ethan? Yes. Don't leave Caldwell because you think it will impress me. He seemed surprised. I'm already leaving. Why? Because I don't like who I became there. That isn't entirely Caldwell's fault. I know. Good. He understood. I'll find something else. You will. Maybe smaller. Your father built a perfectly respectable life doing something small. A sad smile appeared. I used to think that meant he lacked ambition. And now I think he knew when enough was enough. I smiled. He did. Ethan stood. He looked uncertain whether he should hug me. I did not rescue him from that uncertainty. Thank you for letting me in, he said. You're welcome. He walked toward the door. Then he stopped. Mom. Yes. Can I call you sometime? The question nearly broke my heart. You can call. He nodded. He opened the door. Before he stepped outside, I spoke. Ethan. He turned. I can forgive you. His eyes filled immediately. I continued before he misunderstood. But forgiveness doesn't erase what you chose. He nodded slowly. I know. Trust will take longer. I know. And I'm not changing my decisions about Hawthorne Ridge because we had this conversation. I didn't expect you to. Good. For the first time in months, I believed him. He left. I watched him walk toward his old sedan. No company car, no expensive suit, no Grant Caldwell standing behind him. Just Ethan, my son, a deeply flawed man who had hurt me and finally stopped pretending he hadn't. 3 days later, he emailed me. Not about Hawthorne Ridge, not about Caldwell. The subject line simply said, Dad's truck. Inside was a photograph. Ethan had found the old Ford in a storage yard where Samuel's former business partner had kept it after buying some of the company equipment years earlier. Under the picture, Ethan had written, "I used to hate being seen in this thing. Now I'd give anything for one more morning riding in it with him." I cried when I read that, but they were different tears. Not because everything was healed. It wasn't. Not because I trusted Ethan completely again. I didn't. I cried because for the first time he was looking backward without shame. And sometimes healing begins not when people forget the past, but when they finally stop running from it. The following morning, Jonathan called. "We have an agreement in principle." I sat down. With Caldwell, yes. The protections, most of them. The community fund included. And the price he told me. I closed my eyes. It was more money than Samuel and I had earned during many years of our marriage combined. But strangely, the number did not feel like the ending, because by then I understood something. Samuel's greatest gift had never been Hawthorne Ridge. The land was only the mechanism. The real inheritance was what the land had forced me to discover. And soon I would have to decide what to do with it. The final Hawthorne Ridge agreement was signed 6 weeks later. By then, the trees around Richmond had begun changing color. Samuel always loved Virginia in the fall. He used to say, October made even ordinary roads look expensive. I thought about him that morning as I stood in front of my bedroom mirror. I wore the navy dress Ethan had once made me feel embarrassed about. Not deliberately at first, I simply reached for it. Then I remembered that Caldwell Foundation dinner and the way my son had looked at me. For a moment I considered changing. Instead, I put on Samuel's pearl earrings. Then I smiled at myself. The woman in the mirror did not look wealthy. She did not look powerful. She looked like me. That was enough. The signing took place at Jonathan's office. Grant arrived with 2 attorneys and his chief development officer. Ethan was not there. I no longer worked for Caldwell Development. 2 weeks after our conversation, he had formally resigned. He did not make a dramatic announcement. He did not blame Grant. He did not ask Madison to choose between him and her father. He simply left. When he told me, I asked one question. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know." For the old Ethan, that answer would have been terrifying. For the man sitting across from me, it seemed almost freeing. "Then take your time," I said. "I thought you'd tell me to find another job immediately. I spent 40 years worrying about whether you were prepared for the next step. I'm retired from that position." He laughed. It felt good hearing him laugh in my kitchen again. The Hawthorne Ridge agreement was far more complicated than I had ever imagined. Jonathan had spent weeks explaining sections to me. I asked questions until I understood enough to sign with confidence. Caldwell would acquire the 31 acres and negotiated corridor rights under carefully defined terms. The final financial settlement was substantial, far above Grant's original $4.8 million offer. Not the highest theoretical valuation, because negotiations involve compromise, but enough that I would never again have to worry about money. More importantly, the agreement included provisions that mattered to me. Remaining small property owners affected by the development would be offered independent appraisal assistance before selling. Certain negotiations would include extended review periods rather than compressed deadlines. Relocation assistance would be available where applicable, and Caldwell Development committed money to a local community fund supporting residents affected by large-scale development. The provisions were not perfect. Samuel had taught me long ago that perfection was rarely available when property and money were involved, but they were real, and they mattered. Grant sat across from me at the conference table. Jonathan finished reviewing the final signature page. "Lauren," I looked at him. "Any last questions?" I looked down at the document. For weeks, everyone had wanted my signature. Now that the moment had arrived, nobody was rushing me. "No." Jonathan smiled. "Then whenever you're ready." I picked up the pen. Before signing, I looked at Grant. "Did you ever think Samuel would win?" Grant raised an eyebrow. "Win whatever this was between you." His expression softened slightly. "I never considered it a competition." I smiled. "Samuel probably did." Grant surprised me by laughing. "Actually, Samuel hated competitions. That's true. He once told me the problem with wealthy men is that eventually we start thinking every person who says no is challenging us. That sounded exactly like my husband. What did you say I told him that sounded like something a man says when he doesn't have enough money to understand leverage? I shook my head. That also sounds exactly like you. Grant smiled. Yes. And what do you think now? He looked at the agreement. I think Samuel understood leverage quite well. I signed. Jonathan signed where required. Grant's representatives completed their portions. And just like that, Hawthorne Ridge stopped being mine. I expected to feel something dramatic. Loss, victory, relief. Instead, I felt peaceful. Samuel had not preserved that land, so I would keep it forever. He had preserved my right to decide when, why, and under what conditions I would let it go. I had done exactly that. Grant stood and extended his hand. I took it. I hope the project succeeds, I told him. He seemed surprised. You mean that? Yes. I thought you disliked what we were building. I disliked being treated like an obstacle. That's fair. And I disliked watching my son destroy himself trying to impress you. Grant's expression changed. That was never my intention. I believe you. He looked genuinely surprised. Ethan made his own choices, I continued. So did you. So did I. Grant nodded slowly. Then he left. I never became friends with Grant Caldwell. This is not that kind of story. But we stopped being enemies before we ever truly became them. 3 months later, the first major payment from the Hawthorne Ridge Agreement cleared. I stared at the bank statement for nearly 10 minutes. Then I closed it. I did not buy a mansion. I did not buy a sports car. I did finally replace Samuel's collapsing backyard shed. I also hired someone to remodel the kitchen, not because Ethan had once criticized it, because one cabinet door had finally fallen off. I kept the old brass handle. Some things deserved to survive renovation. The biggest decision involved the community fund. The Caldwell agreement had provided seed money, but I wanted to do more. So Jonathan helped me establish the Samuel Pierce Community Land Fund. Its purpose was simple. Older homeowners and small property owners facing major development pressure could receive assistance understanding what they owned. Legal consultations, independent valuations, basic estate planning. Someone sitting beside them who could explain what a document meant before a signature tab told them where to sign. At the first board meeting, Jonathan asked why I wanted Samuel's name attached. Because he spent his life drawing lines, I said. Jonathan smiled, and he understood they mattered. Ethan came to the small opening reception. He arrived early. He wore a simple gray suit, nothing flashy. For the first time in years, I did not wonder what it cost. He stood in front of a framed photograph of Samuel hanging near the entrance. It was not a polished professional portrait. It showed Samuel in work boots beside his surveying equipment. Ethan stared at it for a long time. He would hate that picture being on a wall. He would. He'd say his shirt looked terrible. He would say your mother chose the worst possible photograph. Ethan laughed. Then his eyes became wet. I miss him. So do I. We stood together, not healed completely, but together. Ethan had found a new job with a smaller regional development firm. The salary was lower. The title was less impressive. When he told me, he almost sounded apologetic. I stopped him. Do you like the work? Yes. Do they respect you so far? Do you respect yourself when you leave the office? He went quiet. Then he said more than before. That sounds like a promotion to me. His relationship with Madison survived, though not without strain. I stayed out of it. That was another lesson I had learned. Adult children have adult marriages. Love does not give a mother permission to manage everything. Madison and I slowly repaired our relationship too. She apologized for not recognizing how deeply Ethan had been changing. I told her that was not hers to carry. Ethan needed to own Ethan. And he did. Not perfectly. There were awkward moments. Days when I remembered the Caldwell dinner and became quiet. Times when Ethan tried to apologize and I told him we did not need to reopen the wound every week. Trust returned slowly. He began calling on Sundays. Sometimes he came for dinner. Sometimes we argued. Oddly, I treasured the arguments. They meant we were no longer performing. One Saturday afternoon, nearly a year after the night he disowned me, Ethan helped me clean Samuel's old desk. We found the yellow Hawthorne Ridge folder. The documents inside were no longer important. The transaction was finished. But Samuel's letter remained. I unfolded it. Ethan sat beside me. "Can I read it?" I hesitated, then handed it to him. He read silently. When he reached the sentence about his hungry heart, he stopped. His eyes closed. "Dad really saw me coming, didn't he?" "He saw both of us." Ethan continued reading. When he finished, he returned the letter carefully. "I'm sorry. I know. No, not just for the dinner." I waited. "I'm sorry I made you feel like loving me required giving me what I wanted." That sentence reached somewhere deep. I took his hand. "You were my child for 18 years. He smiled. "Only 18. After that, you were supposed to become an adult. You were running late." He laughed. So did I. Then I looked again at Samuel's letter. For months, people had talked about what my husband left me. 31 acres. A corridor, a trust, millions of dollars. They were wrong. Samuel left me something much more valuable. He left me permission to choose, to ask questions, to say no, to disappoint someone I loved without believing that made me cruel. To recognize that generosity given freely is love, but generosity demanded through guilt becomes surrender. And perhaps most importantly, he reminded me that protecting myself did not mean I loved my son less. Sometimes love requires boundaries precisely because love without boundaries can become permission. I looked at Ethan beside me. I had forgiven him, but I had not erased what happened. Neither had he. That was why our relationship had a chance to become real again. Not because we returned to what we had been, because we built something more honest from what remained. Samuel had spent his career showing people where one property ended and another began. It took me until I was 68 to understand